Chapter 2084. No need. Luo Zhan put it down and smiled bitterly. It's just that there are too many things to do recently, and I feel a little depressed. When I'm done, I'll feel better. I see. Xinjilia nodded and quickly changed the topic. But they could talk about anything. Even when talking about work, Luo Zhan was relaxed and humorous. However, when it came to Lu Yihan, Luo Zhan was always a little vigilant. It was like he didn't want to mention it. But Xinjilia didn't notice that he hated Lu Yihan at all. It was a point that made people wonder. After chatting for a while, Luo Zhan continued to work. Xinjilia also got up and left, but when he went back, he told Luo Ran the general situation. Luo Ran was silent for a moment and said, I suspect that he cheated. Xinjilia said, You are his brother. It is because he is his brother that I am suspicious. I know him too well. He has never had a serious girlfriend for so many years. Last time he had a girlfriend, but he dumped her. In the future, whenever Lu Yihan asks him to do something, he will spare no effort to help. How can a brother be like this? According to what you said, should I also suspect that you have come out of the closet? Bah. Luo Ran spat. I am straight, a man of steel. Recently, I was about to be killed by a woman, and you still suspect that I have come out of the closet? Xinjilia laughed mercilessly. I'm not kidding. I think my brother is likely to fall into Lu Yihan's trap. This guy is very cunning. I don't think so. If he really planned to come out of the closet, he wouldn't be in a hurry to get rid of the project. Since he did this, he must want to get rid of Lu Yihan. Don't worry. Luo Ran said. I hope so. When he returned to the hotel, Yi Qianqian was already back. She was lying in bed playing with her mobile phone. Hearing the sound of the door opening, Yi Qianqian looked up and smiled. Old Shen. Yes. Today, I went shopping with Lily and passed by a fortune-telling stall, so I went to have my fortune read. Again. Xinjilia frowned. Why do you always go to fortune-telling? The more you read, the worse your fortune will be. Aya. Yi Qianqian felt a little disappointed. I was just curious. I'm already 28 years old this year. According to what they said, I should be able to get pregnant this year. So, I went to do a reading. How so? The fortune teller said that I could get pregnant this year. Yi Qianqian held his hand excitedly. Recently, I've seen a lot of children. I'm so envious. Lily Xiao Xiao is so cute. Her nose and eyes are so similar to her parents. She's so beautiful. Xinjilia took off his jacket and shoes and pounced on her. Our children will be like us in the future. Don't be envious of others. We'll have our own children. When Yi Qianqian saw that, she knew what he was up to. She kicked him and said, Go take a bath first. I don't want to wash. I smell good. Bah, go away. I won't do it without bathing. No. If you don't give it to me, I'll use force. How dare you? Yo, you're quite arrogant. Let's see if I dare or not. Oh, he was completely defenseless. Chapter 2085. Yi Qianqian couldn't wake up the next day because of her terrible indulgence the day before. Xinjilia had wanted to let her sleep a little longer. In the end, she slept from 9 o'clock p.m. until 7 o'clock p.m. She didn't wake up even once. Unable to bear it any longer, he shook her awake and shouted, Wake up! Wake up! You still have to take the child to play with Mingli. Oh, I'll sleep a little longer. Yi Qianqian covered her head with the blanket. 10 minutes. Xinjilia was speechless. 10 minutes later, when he returned, Yi Qianqian still showed no signs of waking up. Honey, get up. Xinjilia had no choice but to pull her up. How can you sleep so much? Get up. Well. Yi Qianqian frowned and looked reluctant. I'm not feeling well. I want to sleep. Where do you feel uncomfortable? Sleepy, Xinjilia had no choice but to say. Get up first. You can come back to sleep when you're done. It wasn't easy for you to come to Kingstown. Don't you want to hang out with Xiao Xiao? Yi Qianqian groggily tried to get up and replied. Yes. Then get up. Yi Qianqian got up with her eyes closed and fell into Xinjilia's arms. Old Shen, help me get dressed. Shinjilia felt defeated. He rummaged through the new clothes she had bought the day before. It was a white long-sleeved spring dress. The long shirt and trousers were quite thick. Yi Qianqian allowed him to do whatever he wanted. When she was done changing, she finally opened her eyes and went to brush her teeth and wash her face. By the time she met up with Ming and Yulili, it was already past 8 o'clock. By the time they finished breakfast, it was already past 9 o'clock. Yi Qianqian was overjoyed. She smiled and asked, "What should you call me?" "Auntie Qianqian." The crisp voice was accompanied by a smile. "I want to eat buns." "All right, Auntie will feed you." Yi Qianqian smiled happily and picked up a soup dumpling for her. "Be careful, it's hot." Xiao slowly leaned over and took a bite. As if it was a little hot in the mouth, its little head shrunk back a little. However, it happily leaned forward and took a bite. "Is it delicious?" And Xiao nodded and smiled happily. A pair of big eyes lying silkworms under the eyes was very obvious. Her lips were red, and her face was fair and tender. Today, she was wearing a beautiful white dress. Those who didn't know better would think that they were mother and daughter. "Ah, she's so cute." Yi Qianqian's heart was about to melt. "Old Shin, we want to have a daughter in the future too." "Sure." Shinjilia was inexplicably happy. He looked at the little guy and said, "We're going to have 3. That won't do. We have to pamper our daughter like she's a little princess. We have to have 2 sons to protect our daughter." Yi Qianqian fantasized about it. Her heart was filled with joy. "That would be perfect. Isn't that what happened to Li Xiqing's family?" Ming said. In Li Xiqing's family, they adopted a boy and gave birth to another boy. D*MN for already? Yi Qianqian's eyes widened. "That's so noisy." Yulili was a little envious. "Their children are all so sensible. I don't know how to raise them." "Hey, hurry up and eat. Once you're done, hurry up and go in." Yi Qianqian took Xiao everywhere and unknowingly got lost. She called Shinjilia and told him where to find her. Yi Qianqian led Xiao to sit down at the side. Chapter 2086. In the evening, she grabbed Yi Qianqian's hand and shouted, "Auntie Qianqian, I want to eat this." Xiao was pointing at a big brown bear with a cotton candy stall. Her movements looked a little clumsy, but she looked very cute and attracted the attention of children. "All right, Auntie will buy it for you." She reached for her purse and waited for Bear to finish making the cotton candy. But when he looked down, he saw Xiao standing with a child who looked about 5 years old. The child was not well dressed. He wore a mask on his face and looked at Xiao. Yi Qianqian walked over and took a look. She didn't seem to mind. She held Xiao's little hand and guided her. "Call him little brother." Xiao was also very polite. She shouted, "Hello, little brother." The child glanced at Yi Qianqian and quickly ran away. Yi Qianqian found it a little strange. Why aren't there any adults watching? It was too dangerous for such a small child to run around. But soon the cotton candy was ready. She reached out to take the cotton candy and handed it to Xiao. "Here, take it." "Thank you, Auntie." Xiao was very happy, holding it in her hand with a smile on her face. Yi Qianqian caressed her little face and chuckled. "You're welcome. Let's go back and look for Daddy and Mommy." "Yeah." Xiao licked the cotton candy and held Yi Qianqian's hand. Suddenly, he felt someone approaching him from behind. Yi Qianqian subconsciously turned around. It was a man who looked to be in his 30s. His attire was similar to that of the child from earlier. They were all dirty, but the difference was that this person was striding toward Yi Qianqian aggressively. Yi Qianqian was about to speak when the man suddenly raised his hand and slapped her. Yi Qianqian's face tilted to the side. King be *tch. He scolded in a thunderous voice. "You lied to me and said that you were going to work, but in the end, you kept King gigolo and stole my daughter. You're so shameless." Yi Qianqian was confused. She looked up at him and asked, "Who are you?" "Who am I?" The man looked fierce and sneered. "I am the father of the child." As he spoke, he was about to grab the frightened Xiao next to him. Human traffickers. That was the only word that popped up in Yi Qianqian's mind. She quickly shielded the child and shouted angrily. Who the F***ck are you? Scram. I don't know you. You don't recognize me? The man was furious. He went forward to drag her over and shouted. You've kidnapped my daughter. Why are you pretending to be an upper-class B***tch here? B***tch stinky whore. As he spoke, he raised his leg and kicked Yi Qianqian hard. Mom. Yi Qianqian heard a child crying. She looked up and saw that it was the child who had been staring at Xiao. The child was wearing a mask and stood in front of Yi Qianqian to protect her. It was unclear whether he had intentionally or unintentionally wiped his palm across Yi Qianqian's face. When Yi Qianqian caught a whiff of the pungent odor, she felt her nose flush and her head spin. She could clearly hear the child in front of her shouting, Daddy, don't hit my mommy, I beg you. You're still calling her mom. She doesn't even want you anymore. She took away my family's property, kept a gigolo, and kidnapped my daughter. See if I don't beat you to death, you bitch. Chapter 2087. Yi Qianqian stood up with Xiao in her arms, but before she could steady herself, she was kicked hard. She felt a sharp pain in her head. Caught off guard, she fell heavily to the ground. However, he still protected Xiao in his arms. Looking around, more and more people were crowding around. Yi Qianqian struggled to get up. She grabbed a man's trousers and shouted, Help me! Help me! I don't know him. Daddy. Xiao seemed to see Ming. She suddenly shouted and looked ahead. Daddy! The man came forward in exasperation and pulled her hand away without saying a word. Then, Yi Qianqian felt the emptiness in her arms. Xiao's cries could be heard. She stretched out her hands in one direction and shouted, Daddy! Yi Qianqian's body was weak, and her brain was heavy. Looking in that direction, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his abdomen. It was as if a hand was tugging at her womb, causing her limbs to spasm due to the intense sensation of falling, accompanied by a sharp pain. Damn it, why did Aunt Flo come at this time? Yi Qianqian cursed her bad luck. She endured the pain in her stomach and struggled to get up. She chased after the man. She stretched out her hands, trying to catch him. Yi Qianqian grabbed the man's clothes with both hands, but he kicked her away. UB***tch. F***ck off. The kick was so heavy that it sent Yi Qianqian sprawling on the ground. There was a sharp pain in her waist. A white light flashed in her head, and she cried out in pain. Qianqian. A familiar voice called out. It was Ming. Daddy. Xiao cried loudly and waved her hands at Ming. Ming was shocked and roared. Let go of my daughter. Seeing Ming, Yi Qianqian was relieved, but soon the pain in her lower abdomen became more and more obvious. As the heat flowed down, Yi Qianqian's consciousness began to blur. Yulili was walking behind him. When she saw Ming's reaction, she immediately ran up. However, he saw Yi Qianqian lying on the ground in the crowd. Yi Qianqian was wearing a white suit that day. At that moment, her lower body was dyed a shocking red. Yulili's face turned pale. Her voice trembled as she ran forward. Qianqian. When she saw Yulili, she wanted to get up, but she didn't even have the strength to move her fingers. Tears rolled down Yulili's cheeks. She looked at Yu and panicked. You have to hold on. You have to hold on. Then he turned around and shouted, Shinjulia. However, no one responded. Yulili's hands trembled as she said, Qianqian, don't be afraid. You'll be fine. I'll take you to the hospital right away. As he spoke, he flipped through his phone with trembling hands and dialed 120. Yi Qianqian looked at her and suddenly felt a little amused. She pretended to be lighthearted and said, I'm fine. I'm just a little dizzy. Also, did you bring any sanitary napkins? I might be on my period. When Yulili heard this, she broke down and burst into tears. Don't talk. Shut up. Soon, the ambulance was connected, and Yulili quickly reported the address. Shinjulia searched for a long time. He couldn't find the cotton candy bear stall that Yi Qianqian had mentioned. Finally, after asking for directions several times, he finally found this small path. From afar, Shinjulia saw a large group of people gathered together. It looks like she had a miscarriage. It's so pitiful. Chapter 2088. I knew that the little girl was so cute. It was impossible for her to have a father like that. When I saw her real father, I was amazed. He was so handsome. Don't be so infatuated. The people inside are going crazy. It's so tragic. Shinjulia felt terrible when he heard that. Miscarriage? What a pity. The couple had been struggling for 2 years, but there was no result. Others came to an amusement park, and an unborn child was lost just like that. While he was feeling sorry, he suddenly heard a familiar voice. Qianqian, hold on. It was Lily's voice. Shinjulia's heart skipped a beat, and he turned to look at the crowd. Lily? Shinjulia's voice was very loud. Soon Lily's voice came from inside. Shinjulia. Shinjulia was basically sure that she was inside, so he immediately pushed through the crowd and walked in. Excuse me, please excuse me. Finally squeezing in, Shinjulia saw a cotton candy stall at a glance. However, at the same time he also saw the person who was surrounded in the middle. Lily's face was full of tears. Holding Yi Qianqian in her arms, she broke down and cried. Qianqian! Boom! Something seemed to collapse in his mind. It was like being hit hard on the top of his head by lightning. All the blood in his body suddenly flowed backward and rushed to the top of his head. In an instant, Shinjulia seemed to feel that his whole body was cold. His actions were already one step faster than his brain. When he came back to his senses, he was already by her side. At that moment, Yi Qianqian's snow-white suit had become dirty, and the lower part of her body was shocking red. The smell of blood reached the tip of his nose, with the smell of rust. Shinjulia's heart was shocked, and suddenly he seemed to lose his mind. With trembling hands, he wanted to hold her, but he did not dare to act rashly. How could this be? Shinjulia looked at Yi Qianqian in front of him, and his eyes unconsciously reddened. He looked at Lily and asked, how could this be? Yi Qianqian had already fainted, but when she heard Shinjulia's voice she frowned. But she did not wake up. Honey! Shinjulia couldn't believe what he saw. He took Lily's hand and said, let's go to the hospital. Don't move, I've already called an ambulance. Where's the ambulance? Shinjulia was on the verge of breaking down. He roared with bloodshot eyes. Where's the ambulance? Why isn't it here yet? Yi Qianqian's eyelids were very heavy. In her daze, she could clearly feel that something was rapidly slipping away. However, he couldn't see it clearly, touch it, or grab it. Old Shin. Qianqian, don't let anything happen to you. Don't move. We'll be at the hospital soon. Shinjulia's voice was trembling. Yi Qianqian wanted to reach out and grab him. Very quickly, she was firmly held in his hand. She could feel him kissing her hand. It was warm and wet. Yi Qianqian suddenly felt a little sad. The sharp pain in her lower abdomen had paralyzed her nerves. Vaguely, she seemed to have guessed something. Lifting his eyelids with difficulty, he saw nothing but darkness in front of him. 2 rays of dim light pierced the bottom of his eyes. In front of her, Shinjulia's face was stained with blood. It was a blur, and it was difficult to see clearly. Yi Qianqian opened her mouth, and tears flowed down from the corners of her eyes. She asked weakly, am I pregnant? Chapter 2089. It's okay. It's okay. Shinjulia held her hand. His voice was choked with emotion. However, he quickly restrained his emotions. It'll be fine. You sleep for a while, I'll wake you up later. Yi Qianqian could clearly sense that something was wrong with Shinjulia. Her heart ached terribly, and tears began to stream down her cheeks. He closed his eyes and felt dizzy. However, his senses were so clear. She could feel that she was bleeding. It was fiercer and more ferocious than ever before. The feeling of falling became heavier, and the pain was enough to make one despair. Shinjulia was not usually like this. He wouldn't do that. Why does he look so unsteady? It shouldn't be like this. The pain in her lower abdomen hit her hard. She couldn't help but cry out. No. Shinjulia had finally managed to calm himself down, but when he heard her crying, he almost broke down again. Don't cry. Don't cry. It's all right. Shinjulia wiped away her tears, but his voice was muffled and trembling slightly. He took a deep breath and kissed her hand. In a hoarse voice he whispered, "I'll be fine when we get to the hospital. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Yi Qianqian couldn't help but burst into tears. She held on to Shen Julia's hand tightly. "I didn't know. I didn't know he was here. I didn't know I had a child. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault. Don't cry," Shen Julia pleaded. "We'll have more. This time we weren't prepared. He came too suddenly. Next time, we'll definitely protect him well. Be a good girl. Go to sleep first, okay?" Shen Julia looked at Shen Julia. However, Yi Qianqian could not calm down at all. In a weak and sorrowful voice she said, "I'm sorry." "Don't say sorry, Qianqian." At that moment, Shen Julia's voice became extremely clear. His voice trembled slightly, but he was very rational. He said, "Now, I don't want a child. I want you. Nothing can happen to you. I beg you. Sleep first, okay?" His words made Yi Qianqian feel even more pain and discomfort. No one knew better than her how much Shen Julia loved children. It wasn't easy to get this child. If only he had been discovered earlier. If only he had been discovered earlier. He might have survived and become the first baby in their arms. I'm sorry. Yi Qianqian's voice was sobbing, but her consciousness gradually faded. When she woke up again, she could clearly hear the heartbeat. The smell of medicine rushed to the tip of her nose. She moved and opened her eyes. The light in the room was dazzling. Yi Qianqian frowned and narrowed her eyes. "You're awake?" Shen Julia asked. "Do you feel uncomfortable anywhere?" Yi Qianqian was a little dazed when she heard his voice. Waves of pain came from her stomach, stinging every nerve in her body. Julia Shen's heart as if it was, and he felt. Yi Shen as he holding her hand, he averted his reddened eyes and said, "I'll call the doctor." Chapter 2090. Shen Julia didn't make a sound. He bent down and kissed her gently on the forehead. Then he took her hand away. He whispered, "Wait a minute. I'll ask the doctor to examine you." Soon, Shen Julia went out. When Yi Qianqian saw his reaction, she knew the answer. She seemed to have lost all her strength. Lying on the bed, Yi Qianqian's vision suddenly blurred. When the doctor came in, Yi Qianqian was looking at the ceiling with tears streaming down her face. After checking everything was fine, Yi Qianqian was already sobbing. Shen Julia didn't make a sound. He sat quietly beside her and held her hand tightly in his. "I'm sorry," Yi Qianqian said with a strong nasal voice. "I'm sorry, old Shen. I'm sorry." Shen Julia stood up, leaned over and kissed her deeply, gently and tenderly. Shen Julia quickly let go and looked at her condescendingly. Yi Qianqian's tears were like a raging spring, flowing down uncontrollably. At that moment, her eyes were already red and swollen as she looked at him. "We were not prepared." Shen Julia looked at her. "No one expected him to come at this time. It's not your fault. It's me. If I had been by your side at that time, this would never have happened. I'm the one who should say sorry. Honey, I'm sorry." Yi Qianqian's tears flowed even more fiercely. She immediately raised her hands and hugged him, letting herself cry even more. Shen Julia's eyes were filled with warmth. He gently patted her shoulder and didn't make a sound. "Qianqian." A soft female voice came quietly. Shen Julia looked sideways and saw Yu Lily. Yu Lily walked in with a little girl in her hand, followed by Ming. Behind Ming, there were two big men. Each of them carried one person, and were quickly thrown to the ground. Yi Qianqian looked sideways. Wasn't it the man who pretended to be her husband, and wanted to abduct the child and beat her, until she had a miscarriage? The man had a swollen nose and a swollen face, and his hands and feet didn't look nimble. After being thrown by the big man, he was immediately trampled on the ground like a useless dog. The other one was the child who cooperated with the man. However, the mask on the child's face was gone. It was a mature man's face, but it was now bruised. "Let me go. I didn't know she was pregnant. If I had known, I wouldn't have dared to hit her even if I had 100 guts." The man who was thrown down immediately cried and kowtowed. I'm sorry. I know I was wrong. I won't dare to do it again. This time, I was just possessed. Ah. Before he could finish speaking, Oming kicked him hard on the neck, and he fell to the ground. Oming's expression was fierce, and he didn't hold back his strength as he stomped on the ground. You don't dare? I'm afraid I won't dare to do it if I die. That person was trampled on the ground, and his face was already green and red. Enough. Hand us over to the police if you have the guts. We can sue you for abusing justice. The kid said. His voice was that of a mature man. Oming loosened his foot and kicked him hard in the chest. The man, who was as thin as a child, was kicked to the ground, his face full of pain. Apologize, Oming growled. You dare to hit anyone? Are you tired of living? His face was fierce, and his voice was fierce. As soon as he finished speaking, the big man who had just beaten them to the point where they couldn't get up took 2 more steps forward. He was full of deterrence. Chapter 2091. I'm sorry. The 2 men got up and kowtowed in Yi Qianqian's direction. We won't do it again. Please forgive us. The 2 men looked like they were on the verge of collapsing. It seemed that they had been beaten up badly. Yu Lily held her daughter's head, not letting her see or hear. Her eyes were red and swollen. Looking at Yi Qianqian, who was still indifferent on the bed, her heart ached. Send them to the police station, Shenjilia said indifferently. Oming, how long can you let them be sentenced? When Oming heard that, he knew what he meant. Don't worry. They won't be out for at least 20 or 30 years. Oming looked at them coldly. Take them away. Yes. The 2 bodyguards each took one of them away. The 2 men shouted unwillingly. Be ****. What right do you have to do this? You think you're so great just because you're rich? Let us go. Yi Qianqian closed her eyes and turned her head away. Qianqian, I'm sorry. Yu Lily's voice was choked. If I had taken care of the child myself, it would have been better. But I gave the child to you. I'm sorry. I hurt you. You can scold or hit me. I'm sorry, Qianqian, Lily, Shenjilia said. It's my fault. Don't blame yourself. If I had followed them closely, nothing would have happened. If I hadn't asked you to go out to play, nothing would have happened. Yu Lily held her daughter and guided her. I'm sorry to Auntie Qianqian. Auntie Qianqian, I'm sorry. Oh, Xiao pouted and looked aggrieved. If I didn't eat Tang, it would have been fine. The little girl's face was tense, and she almost cried. Her eyes were red. She looked up at her mother and said, Mom, call me godmother. Oming walked forward and picked Oh Xiao up. If it weren't for Qianqian today, you would have been taken away by the bad guys today. You might have been killed and never seen your parents again. Auntie Qianqian is your second parent. From now on, call Auntie Qianqian godmother. Godmother. Oh Xiao pouted and called out. Yi Qianqian couldn't hold back her tears anymore. She turned her head and saw that they all had solemn expressions on their faces. You don't have to do this. Yi Qianqian looked at them. It's me. If I hadn't brought her around, we wouldn't have met those 2 people, and we wouldn't have gotten lost. Nothing would have happened to us. His voice was very low, so low that it was barely discernible. When he heard Yi Qianqian's words, he held her hand. There's no such thing, Oming said. There's no such thing as knowing everything in advance. You saved Xiao, so you're her savior. If you don't want to be her godmother, that's fine. Qianqian, we're truly grateful to you. It was the first time Oming had spoken to Yi Qianqian in such a serious manner. The moment he opened his mouth, he said it in such a manner. Yi Qianqian felt a little emotional. Looking sideways, Oming had already walked over with his daughter in his arms. Call her godmother. Godmother. Yi Qianqian suddenly chuckled, and tears rolled down her cheeks. With a smile on her face, she teased, In that case, I've earned a daughter. She propped herself up and tried to sit up. Shenjilia quickly went forward to help her up. Oh Xiao went forward and wiped her face with her tiny hands. She said, Godmother, don't cry. Chapter 2092. Oh Xiao didn't quite understand. She looked up at her parents. Yu Lily's eyes were red, but there was a smile on her face. Oh Xiao Xiao didn't understand, so she turned back. Oh Xiao Xiao didn't quite understand, so she turned around. Oh Xiao Xiao didn't understand, so she turned back. That was good. Yi Qianqian's release was the best ending. The child came suddenly. Although it was a pity, no one expected it. Xinjilia suddenly remembered what his grandmother had said a few years ago. There will be a disaster at 28. Maybe it was the disaster they were talking about. It was a good thing to face it. It was better than always worrying about when it would suddenly come. Xinjilia looked away. Suddenly his phone rang. He picked it up and saw that it was from his grandmother. Xinjilia didn't avoid it. He picked it up and said, "Grandma." "Jilia." Old Mrs. Shun's voice sounded a little sad. "Did something happen to Qianqian today?" Xinjilia was stunned and looked at Yi Qianqian. Yi Qianqian looked back. She seemed to have guessed something. "Yeah," Xinjilia replied. "How did you know?" Old Mrs. Shun sighed. "Fate." Xinjilia was silent when he heard that. Yi Qianqian looked at him and asked, "What did Grandma say?" Xinjilia didn't answer. He said to the old woman on the phone, "Yeah." "So what happened to Qianqian?" Old Mrs. Shun asked. "I'm getting more and more useless. It was Dongfang who told me that something happened to Qianqian." Sigh. "Something happened. I'll tell you later. Go to bed early. Goodbye, Grandma." Jilia. Old Mrs. Shun wanted to say something. But before she could say it, Xinjilia hung up the phone. Yi Qianqian looked at him and asked, "Does Grandma know?" "I don't know." Xinjilia looked at her. "I know that something happened to you, but I don't know what it is." Yi Qianqian lowered her head and answered, "Yeah." "Are you hungry? What do you want to eat?" "I'll buy it." Oming looked at them. "You're my daughter's godmother. I can't treat you badly." Yi Qianqian smiled and said, "Thank you, but I have no appetite now." "Let's go back first," Yu Lily said. "Qianqian needs to rest. Let's not disturb her here." "Yeah," Oming said. "That's true. Qianqian isn't in a good state. Let's go back first and visit her tomorrow." "All right. In that case, Old Shen will be leaving first." Oming came forward and carried his daughter over. "If you need anything, remember to call us." "All right." Finally he left. Yi Qianqian was exhausted. Xinjilia walked over and gently pulled her into his arms. "Sleep for a while," he said. "Yeah." Yi Qianqian closed her eyes and fell asleep with his help. However, she quickly closed her eyes and said, "Hubby." "Yes." "What if?" Yi Qianqian's voice trembled, and her tears fell. "What if I can't get pregnant in the future?" "Don't let your imagination run wild," Xinjilia said with a frown. "You're the only one with a rich imagination. How can you live a good life?" Yi Qianqian sniffled, wiped her face, and turned her head away. Xinjilia sighed softly, but then he received another call from his family. It was Shen Luon. When he picked up the phone, he heard the sound of the wind. Xinjilia frowned and said, "Hello." Shen Luo and was driving and hadn't reached home yet. At that moment, he was in a great mood and taking Shen Manting for a ride. I'll update chapter 31 first and continue during the day. I can't take it anymore. I'm going to sleep. If you're done, you can go read the new book, 99 Days of Hidden Marriage. Prima Donna, please be reserved. Seeking monthly votes. Chapter 2093. Xinjilia's voice was clearly a little low. It sounded like he was in a very low mood. When Shen Luo heard her voice, he swallowed the good news that was on the tip of his tongue and asked, "What's wrong with you?" "Grandma told you?" "What's wrong?" Shen Luo felt that something was amiss. "What did Grandma tell me?" "I'm outside with Manting. We haven't returned home yet." Xinjilia was in a very low mood. When he heard this, he simply replied, "Yeah." "Not in a good mood? Did you quarrel with your wife?" Only Yi Qianqian could make the usually happy-go-lucky Xinjilia so depressed. Shen Luo had a premonition that he had already guessed correctly. He comforted her and said, "It's common for a married couple to quarrel. Be nice and apologize to Qianqian. There's nothing wrong with that." Xinjilia said nothing. Shen Luo, and was even more certain of that. To avoid making him even more unhappy, he changed the topic and said, I came out with Manting today. We went to the Civil Affairs Bureau. He glanced at Shen Manting and said, We're married. Shen Manting couldn't help but be influenced by Shen Luo's cheerful expression. Looking at the two little red books in his hands, he was in a very good mood. When Shen Jilia heard this, his heart was filled with mixed feelings. He forced a smile and said, I've finally succeeded. Is Sister Manting by your side? Yes. Shen Luo was in a great mood. I'll take her out for a ride. Yes, congratulations. Are you preparing for the wedding? As Shen Jilia spoke, he sensed Yi Qianqian's gaze on him from the bed. Yi Qianqian seemed to have guessed what was going on and asked, Are you married? Shen Jilia nodded his head and replied, Yeah. I went to the Civil Affairs Bureau today. Yeah, it's pretty good. Congratulate Big Brother on my behalf. Yi Qianqian's voice was very soft, and her throat was a little hoarse. Finally, the clouds have parted to reveal the moon. Get some sleep. Shen Jilia gently stroked the hair on the side of her face. I'll go get some dinner. I haven't had dinner yet. What's wrong? Shen Luo finally sensed that something was wrong. Did you two quarrel? What happened to Qianqian? Shen Jilia's heart ached when he heard this. He tucked Yi Qianqian in and said softly, I'm going out to make a call. Wait for me to come back. Yeah. Yi Qianqian closed her eyes. Shen Jilia turned off the lights and closed the door behind him. He gave the nurse some instructions before walking out of the hospital. Shen Luo had been waiting all this while. He had a bad feeling about this. Something happened to us. What is it? She met a human trafficker who drugged her. She was beaten up and found out she was pregnant. Shen Luo was shocked and couldn't help but tense up. That child. I couldn't. Shen Jilia's voice was low. It was so deep that it was almost hopeless, and it made people feel sad. Shen Luo fell silent. The joy on Yi's face disappeared. Shen Manting noticed that he had suddenly become serious and couldn't help but ask, Honey, what's wrong? Shen Luo shook his head and asked Shen Jilia, Have you caught the culprit? Yes, Ming is handling it. However, the lost child could never come back. Shen Jilia's heart sank. He reversed the car into his own yard before turning off the engine and stopping. Do Mom and Dad know? I haven't told them yet. Shen Jilia sighed heavily. Grandma just called me. She's old, and I'm afraid she'll be sad. Can you help me find an excuse? Chapter 2094. I haven't told them yet. Shen Jilia sighed heavily. Grandma called me just now. She's getting on in her years, and I'm afraid she'll be upset. Can you help me find an excuse to brush her off? Shen Luo's mood became very heavy. He let out a long sigh and closed his eyes. How many more days are you going to stay in Kingstown? When Qianqian is almost better, we'll go back, but it might not be that soon. Grandma doesn't know what happened to Qianqian. I know, but I don't know the specifics. If Grandma asks, just say that you fell and need to be hospitalized. We will return to the capital in a few days. He helped Shen Manting unfasten her seatbelt before getting out of the car. Shen Manting watched as Shen Luo hung up the phone. She hurriedly chased after him and asked, Hubby, what's wrong? Shen Luo looked at the two little red booklets in her hands. When he read them just now, they were filled with joy, excitement, satisfaction, and happiness. But now it was complicated. He gently hugged her and whispered, Something unfortunate happened to Qianqian and Jilia. Shen Manting could feel his sadness. She reached out and gently hugged him. She asked curiously, I just heard you mention the child. What's the matter? Qianqian and Jilia have been married for more than 2 years. They've always wanted a child. Shen Luo's voice was a little slow and hoarse. But something happened today. Qianqian accidentally had a miscarriage. Shen Manting was shocked, and her body trembled. Miscarriage? Shen Manting's heart ached when she heard those words. She pushed him away in disbelief. How could this be? Shen Luo sighed softly. I'm not too sure about the specifics, but I'm guessing that Grandma has already guessed it. So if Grandma asks later, don't say anything. I'll explain it to her. You have to be happy and tell Mom, Dad, and Grandma that we're married, okay? Shin Manting nodded. Got it. I'll only report the good news and not the bad. Okay. Shin Luoan smiled and couldn't help but kiss her on the lips. Then he said softly, let's go in. Shin Longyue and his wife sat in the living room with old Mrs. Shin. Little Moon was playing with his toy car in the open space in the living room. When he saw them coming back, he jumped up happily and shouted, Daddy! Mom! She dashed forward with her tiny feet in her tiny shoes and hugged his thigh. Shin Luoan bent down and picked up the baby. She tapped the baby's nose and said, Are you listening to the adults at home? Little Moon sounded like he was asking for credit. Little Moon, be a good boy. Shin Luoan smiled and turned to look at the elders. Shin Longyue was fine, but the two women couldn't hide the worry on their faces. Old Mrs. Shin's face was full of anxiety as she said, Luoan, I just called you. Why was the line busy? Did you call Julia? He nodded and sat down on the sofa with the infant in his arms. Yay. Julia just told me that Qianqian had a fall in Kingstown and will need to be hospitalized for a few days. She's not in a good mood, so I didn't tell you much. When old Mrs. Shin heard that, she had an expression that said, I knew it. She asked anxiously, Where did you fall? It's not serious, right? What's the situation now? It's nothing. It's nothing serious. Shin Luoan glanced at them. Why do all of you look so worried? If Julia says it's nothing, then it's nothing. Chapter 2095. Mrs. Shin looked worried. She looked up and saw Shin Manting's hand. That pair of white and tender hands held a smear of red. She looked carefully and saw that it was 2 red booklets. Mrs. Shin was shocked. She seemed to have guessed something and asked, Manting, what are you holding? Shin Manting saw that she had noticed and looked up at Shin Luoan. Shin Luoan gave her a reassuring look. Then Shin Manting said, Mom, this is the marriage certificate. Marriage certificate? This time, it wasn't just Mrs. Shin. Even Shin Longyue and old Mrs. Shin looked over. Old Mrs. Shin stood up and said, Marriage certificate? Who's married? Are you married? Shin Manting had never seen such a scene before. She felt inexplicably nervous when she saw the elders of the family coming over. Mrs. Shin's face relaxed, and with a hint of coaxing she said, Come, let Mother take a look. As she spoke, she stretched out her hand. Shin Manting placed the warm little notebook in her hand and withdrew her hand in a flash. Mrs. Shin felt the warmth on the booklet and couldn't hide the joy on her face. She opened it and saw a photo. Wasn't it Shin Luoan and Shin Manting? Shin Luoan and Shin Manting's dates of birth were written on it, along with their ID numbers. Mrs. Shin was delighted and said, Mom, look. Old Mrs. Shin leaned over and saw the words on the booklet. She slapped her thigh and cheered, Luoan, you little rascal. Shin Longyue also came forward and confirmed the marriage certificate with a faint smile on his face. Shin Manting felt a little scared. Why does it feel like a little white rabbit in a wolf's den? She felt like she was being surrounded by a pack of wolves. It felt like she was going to be devoured by them at any time. She reached out and tugged at Shin Luoan's sleeve and said, Hubby, Mom, Dad, and Grandma seem very happy. Shin Luoan smiled and reached out to hug her. He whispered, Of course we're happy. We're a married couple from now on. Shin Manting felt that something was amiss. She nodded and said, Yes. Old Mrs. Shin was undoubtedly the happiest of them all. She immediately took out an almanac and said, In that case, I'll take a look at this year's auspicious date and organize your wedding. Yes, and we have to make it big. Mrs. Shin was very happy. You don't know how many people are saying that Luoan is in his 30s and still unmarried. His child is already 2 years old. Now it's all good. The whole family is together and happy. As he spoke, he stepped forward and held Shin Manting's hand. He sighed and said, From now on, live a good life with Luoan. No matter what, this is your home. Shin Manting felt even more uncomfortable. But in his heart he did not feel the slightest bit of joy. It was as if he was shrouded in a huge conspiracy. She was completely unaware that she was in the middle of this huge whirlpool. This feeling was very uncomfortable. Shin Manting wanted to laugh, but she couldn't. He pursed his lips and said, "Mom, I'm tired." "Hey, I'm sleepy." Mrs. Shin quickly let go of Shin Luo, and then reached out to pat him. "Did you hear that? I'm sleepy." This made Shin Luo chuckle. He stood up and gently held Shin Manting's hand. He said, "Little Moon will sleep with you tonight." Chapter 2096. His voice was full of joy and laughter. Mrs. Shin was not the only one. Almost the whole family was very, very happy. Shin Manting felt that something was wrong. She looked at her hand that was held by Shin Luo, and then lowered her head slightly. When they returned to the room, Shin Luo unlocked the door behind him. Shin Manting held Shin Luo's hand and felt a little nervous. She looked up and saw Shin Luo's amber eyes that were smiling. "Honey, we weren't married before, right?" Shin Manting looked at Shin Luo and then asked, "Then why do I call Mom and Dad and Grandma before we're married?" His eyes were clean and pure. The doubt in them was very obvious. Shin Luo was stunned for a moment by such a question. "Honey, I think I'm very familiar with them. I seem to remember that I used to call them that too." Shin Manting's words carried a moderate amount of doubt, but it was just doubt. But in Shin Luo's ears, it was like a knock on the door, getting louder and louder. He didn't know whether to open the door or not. If he opened it, what would he be facing? If he didn't open it, as long as she continued to knock, one day, it would open. Looking at Shin Manting, Shin Luo's lips moved, and then he said, "We just haven't registered our marriage, but our relationship is no different from that of a normal husband and wife. So my parents are your parents, my grandma is your grandma, and my brother is your brother." Shin Manting nodded and added with a smile, "Your son is my son." Shin Luo chuckled and reached out to hold her waist. He whispered, "I'm also yours." His gaze was very deep and intense. Shin Manting could clearly feel that he cared for her and loved her. Her cheeks were slightly hot. Shin Manting held his arm with both hands, slightly tiptoed, and quickly kissed him. However, when she was about to withdraw, Shin Luo caught her. He tightened his grip around her waist. He kissed her deeply. Shin Manting responded with some difficulty, and her hands clung to him more tightly. Shin Luo kissed her and soon fell on the bed with her, kissing her. The fiercest and most primitive instincts easily stirred up the fire in their bodies. Shin Manting felt satisfied and blissful as he pressed down on her. The moment he sank into her, her heart fluttered. She couldn't help but hug him tightly. Instinctively, uncontrollably, she called out, "Shin Luo." Shin Luo's body stiffened when he heard the indistinct voice. Shin Manting noticed that he had stopped moving and felt a little impatient. She opened her eyes and looked at him, but she found that Shin Luo's expression was a little dark. He couldn't understand. He couldn't see through it. "Hubby." Shin Manting's eyes were blurred as she looked at him in confusion. Shin Luo seemed to have thought of something, and his body moved away slightly. Then he suddenly slammed into her. She burst into tears and clutched his shoulders tightly. She couldn't help but let out a short cry. "Ah, call me husband." Shin Luo leaned forward and planted a passionate kiss on her neck. "Manting, I love you," he said in a low voice. "Grand Duke." Shin Manting hugged him tightly and said breathlessly, "I love you too." Chapter 2097. Shin Manting didn't know when she fell asleep. In a daze, she seemed to notice that Shin Luo was helping her bathe. In a daze, she was woken up twice. It was not until the second half of the night that she finally stopped. However, in the second half of the night, she seemed to have a terrible dream. She dreamed that Shin Luo reeked of alcohol. He tore her clothes and pressed her violently against the washstand in the bathroom. He brought her into the abyss again and again. The tearing pain made her heart wrench. Such a dream was too real. Shin Manting's heart ached. She couldn't help but grab him and cry, "Brother, don't." But he was still indifferent. What awaited her was inhuman torment. The despair of not being able to see the light of day. And his cruelty. "Please don't do this to me, don't." Shin Manting seemed to have a nightmare. Her hands fluttered, and a low whimper came from her side. When Shin Luo opened his eyes, Shin Manting's face was already covered in tears. He reached out and gently patted her. He whispered, "Don't be afraid, Manting." However, the next moment he clearly heard her talking in her sleep. "Brother, don't." His heart suddenly skipped a beat, and Shin Luoan was alarmed. He felt as if a basin of cold water had been poured over him, from the top of his head to the bottom of his heels. He hurriedly reached out and picked her up. He shook her gently and said, "Manting, wake up." Shin Luo, and shook her a little too hard, and she quickly opened her eyes. Shin Manting was a little confused when she saw the darkness around her. Shin Luo and held her tightly in his arms. "Hubby." Shin Manting was confused and called out to him. The tension in Shin Luo's body was released at that moment. Shin Luo's back was already covered with a thin layer of sweat when he relaxed his body. "Well, it's okay. It's just a nightmare." Shin Luoan gently patted her and said softly, "Don't be afraid, I'm here." Shin Manting was really afraid. Tears gushed out of her eyes. She hugged him and said, "Hubby, I just dreamed of something terrible." "Don't be afraid. Dreams are fake." "Yes." Shin Manting couldn't help but tremble with fear. "Nightmares are always the opposite. My husband would never treat me like that." Shin Luoan's body stiffened. His heart felt like it was being clutched tightly. Shin Luoan felt an indescribable sense of regret and sadness in his throat. He hugged her tightly and buried his face in her neck. Shin Manting was tickled by his breath. She shrank back and said shyly, "Hubby, I'm so sleepy." "Okay," Shin Luoan said in a low voice. "Go to sleep." Shin Manting nodded in satisfaction. She wrapped her arms around his narrow waist and said, "Hubby, I feel so happy." Her words, which caught Shin Luoan off guard, were like a heavy weight pressing down on his heart. He lifted his head and kissed the corner of her eye. "Me too. I'm so happy to have you by my side." The smile on Shin Manting's face widened, and she fell into a deep sleep. Under the quilt, a pair of hands wrapped around his waist, and her breathing gradually calmed down. However, she didn't notice that there were tears overflowing from the corner of his eyes. The night was quiet. The room was dark. Chapter 2098. His faint voice sounded particularly lonely in the quiet night. The next day, when Shin Manting woke up, she found that Shin Luoan was already gone. She had already put on her clothes. Shin Manting got up, and her legs were even more sore. After washing up, she found a nice set of clothes to change into. Shin Manting was in a good mood. She was wearing a beautiful pink dress that fit her well. Shin Manting almost couldn't recognize herself in the mirror. She combed her hair bit by bit, and carefully tied it into a bun. She didn't remember who had told her that she looked cute with a bun. She looked in the mirror to make sure that she looked beautiful before walking out. But when she came out, she found that Shin Luoan had already left for work. She was greatly disappointed. His good mood seemed to have been doused with a bucket of cold water at this moment. "Did I sleep too late? My husband went to work without waiting for me." Shin Manting was a little unhappy. She looked at her toes and said, "If I had known, I would have gotten up earlier." Seeing her like that, Nanny, he couldn't bear to see her like that. She explained, "Young master received several calls early this morning. It seemed that there was a problem in the laboratory. It was very urgent, so he went to work first. He asked me to inform you when you woke up." "Really?" Shin Manting's eyes were filled with a little light again. "What about little Moon?" "Old Madam took him out to play." Nanny, he looked at her and smiled. "Go and sit for a while. Lunch will be ready soon. You can call and ask when Shin Luoan will be back for lunch." Shin Manting's eyes lit up. She nodded and said, "I'll go now." Her pink dress was like a pink butterfly spreading its wings in spring. Her steps were light and happy, and she looked carefree. Nanny, he looked at Shin Manting and sighed softly. She whispered to herself, "If only it could always be like this." Unfortunately, she had to face reality sooner or later. She heard him talking to Shin Jilia on the phone in the morning. Shin Manting's situation was very unstable. If the nightmares continued, it was very likely that she would regain her previous memories one day. That meant, what seemed to be a peaceful and happy facade now would be punctured. The seemingly beautiful relationship between Shen Luo and Shin Manting might return to how it was in the past. He felt a little sad when he thought of the scene that might happen in the future. His gaze turned to the lush green grass outside the window, and his emotions were very complicated. Shin Manting returned to her room and picked up her cell phone to call Shen Luon. He dialed twice before the other side picked up. "Hubby," Shin Manting called out sweetly. "Are you busy?" "I'm not too busy right now," Shen Luon said. His voice was emotionless. "Did you miss me?" Shin Manting blushed when she heard this. He thought about it. He really wanted to. However, it was too shameful to say such words. She thought for a moment, then pouted and said, "Why didn't you call me? I haven't shaved your beard yet." There was a moment of silence on the other side of the phone. Then he heard a smiling voice. "It's not every day that you get to shave. Have you eaten?" Chapter 2099. Well, okay. Shin Luoan agreed, and Shin Manting's heart was even sweeter. "Do you want to eat cake?" Shin Luoan asked. "I'll bring you one when I come back." Cake. Shin Manting hadn't heard this word for a long time, and she almost drooled. When she was young, she rarely ate cake. She could only see a very small piece on Meifeng's birthday. However, she didn't know when her birthday was, so she never had a birthday and never had a birthday cake of her own. Hearing this, Shin Manting was greedy and excited, and asked, "Is it my birthday today?" Shin Luoan seemed to be laughing, and he said softly, "Must you eat cake on your birthday? Then I won't buy it." No, of course not." Shin Manting quickly straightened up, but soon realized that she was too anxious, and felt a little embarrassed and said, "I want to eat it." "Wait for me at home." Shin Luoan's voice was full of indescribable gentleness. "I'll be there in half an hour." "Okay." Shin Manting was in a hurry. "Hurry up, I'll wait for you." "I'm hanging up, hurry up." "Okay." Shin Luoan agreed, and the phone was hung up. Shin Manting quickly threw the phone on the bed, and immediately got up, and went to the bathroom to tidy up her messy hair. After tidying up her dress, she patted her face and walked out contentedly. But suddenly, she remembered that there was still half an hour. She went back to the room, took out the computer, and opened the movie she watched last time. Gone with the Wind. After clicking on it, the webpage automatically jumped to the last time she watched it. Shin Manting put the computer on the coffee table, and was very fascinated. When she saw Rhett get drunk and rape Si Jelly, she felt a stabbing pain in her heart. The scene changed and it was already the next day. Si Jelly sang and stretched, and she was in a very good mood. When the servant came to help her change, Si Jelly asked, "Where is he?" Shin Manting then realized. Si Jelly didn't know that she loved Rhett at first. Unfortunately, after he forced himself on her, he clearly realized his own feelings. How silly. Shin Manting felt sorry for Scarlet. Don't you know who you love? They had been married for so many years, and their children were already so big. The stone should be warm by now. But Scarlet still thought that she was deeply in love with Ashley. However, Rhett believed it. His cold and distant attitude towards her made Scarlet, who had always been flattered, feel heartache. However, she couldn't swallow her pride and admit defeat to him. Rhett had always thought that this marriage was just his own wishful thinking. Therefore, he poured all his love into his daughter. Even the love he had for Scarlet had been given to Bonnie Bai. However, after Bonnie White's accidental death, Rhett completely broke down. Shin Manting sat on the sofa and cried out loud. When Nanny he saw her, she frowned and came up to her. What happened? Dead. Shin Manting wiped away her tears. Their daughter is dead. The male lead is so pitiful. He thinks that the female lead doesn't love him. Sob. Nanny, he said. It's time to eat. Stop looking. Just then the doorbell rang. Shin Manting immediately closed the laptop, stood up, and rushed to open the door. Chapter 2100. Shin Manting's lithe figure caught Nanny He's attention. He couldn't help but curl his lips into a smile. Then he turned his head away and didn't look at them anymore. Shin Luoan was startled, but soon, the faint fragrance made him smile slightly. He reached out and hugged her. He could easily feel her excitement, her joy, and her excitement. "You're back." Shin Manting looked up at him with an excited and happy smile. "Where's the cake?" Shin Luo deliberately kept a straight face and said, "I thought you missed me, but it turns out that you were only thinking about your cake." Shin Manting didn't feel embarrassed at all. She smiled excitedly and couldn't help but jump up and say, "Quick, quick, the cake." Shin Luo noticed that her eyes were a little red. "Did you cry?" Shin Luo gently stroked her face and looked at her pitifully. Shin Manting pouted and said, "I was watching a movie just now. It's the war romance we watched the other night. Bonnie Bai died. I'm so sad." Shin Luo couldn't help but laugh when he heard this. He said, "The movie is fake. How can you cry after watching it?" "Well," Shin Manting's eyebrows drooped. "The movie is fake, but the feelings I put into it were real. Although it's fake, I'm still so sad, so sad." Shin Luo didn't know what to think when he heard this. He looked at her for a while and then replied, "Okay." He took out the cake and placed it on the table. "I bought 4 flavors in one. There's chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, and matcha." Shin Manting felt her mouth water just by listening to it. She couldn't wait and said, "Quick, quick, quick, I want to eat the cake." "Let's eat first, Nanny," he said. "Mr. and Mrs. Shen aren't coming home today, and old Mrs. Shen took little Moon out to play. We're the only ones eating at home. There will be leftovers later. Eat a few bites first." "It's okay." Shin Luo opened the cake and revealed an exquisite 4-colored cake inside. There were a variety of beautiful fruits on top. As soon as the cake was opened, the fragrance overflowed. Shin Manting's mouth was almost watering. Her thumb moved quickly. Shin Luo picked up a small plastic knife and cut a piece. He asked, "What flavor do you want?" "Strawberry," Shin Manting replied without hesitation. Shin Luo had already expected it. After he cut a piece, Shin Manting immediately took it. He picked up his fork and took a bite. Shin Manting's face was full of happiness. She stomped her feet excitedly and said, "It's delicious." "Then eat more." Shin Luo looked at her with a smile. "But remember to eat. You can't just eat cake until you're full." "Yes, yes," Shin Manting answered. However, a promise was a promise. In the end, he couldn't help but eat 2 more pieces. After tasting the chocolate and vanilla flavor, he stopped giving her the matcha flavor when it was her turn. "Let's eat first. Don't eat cake. Eating cake alone is not good for your stomach." Shin Luo finally stopped her. Shin Manting looked at the cakes reluctantly and finally picked up the rice on the table. After the meal, Shin Manting didn't feel like watching the movie anymore. She hugged his arm and said, "Honey, can you take me to your workplace? Why do you suddenly want to go?" Chapter 2101. Shin Manting looked at him expectantly, and her mind was full of such images. Shin Luo was wearing a white coat and a mask, shuttling back and forth in the laboratory with all kinds of equipment. She was a little excited when she thought about it. She held Shin Luo's arm and said, "Honey, can you take me to see it?" Shin Luo looked down and saw Shin Manting's big bright eyes. They were full of expectation. He smiled and said, "Then put on your shoes." Shin Manting immediately cheered when she heard this. She jumped up and shouted, "Hooray!" Then she immediately let go of Shin Luo's arm and ran to the shoe cabinet to find her new shoes. After putting them on happily, she ran back to the room and looked in the mirror. After finding that she was very cute and beautiful, she hurried out. "Let's go." Shin Manting was full of eagerness. Shin Luo saw this, stood up and picked up the car key. Along the way, Shin Manting's mind was full of what kind of scene she would see later. Looking at the rapidly passing road in front of her, she asked curiously, "Honey, will there be colleagues in the laboratory?" "Yes." "Will there be many?" "2 business partners and some buddies." "Yes." Shin Manting's eyes lit up. "I knew it. The scientists' laboratories must be secret bases. Very few people can get in, right? So there are only 2 like-minded partners who can realize their dreams together. Isn't that right, hubby?" Shin Manting's eyes lit up. Shin Luo and couldn't help but laugh when he heard Shin Manting's cinematic words. For a moment, he didn't know whether to nod or shake his head. Soon, all Shin Manting's questions were answered. When they arrived at the laboratory, the colleagues had gone to eat, and Lao Wu and another colleague were injecting drugs into the mice. Just as Shin Manting had imagined, he was wearing a mask and a white coat. The laboratory was very big. There were all kinds of instruments, microscopes, computers, and test tubes. They were arranged in an orderly manner. When Shin Manting saw it, she couldn't help but exclaim, "Wow!" Lao Wu glanced at Shin Luo, and was surprised. "Luo, and why did you bring?" "Well, sister-in-law." Seeing this, the people next to him suddenly raised their heads. "This is sister-in-law. Sister-in-law is not a vegetable." "You're awake," Shin Luo said. "Didn't Lao Wu tell you? She didn't come a few days ago because she woke up." When Jin Yang heard this, he looked at OL5 and shouted, "Didn't you tell me that he has mental problems again? Are you lying to me?" When Shin Manting heard this, she immediately grasped the key point. Again? Was Shin Luo insane? Shin Manting was a little curious and asked, "Is my husband mentally ill?" Old Five suddenly laughed out loud. Jin Yang smiled and said, "You can say that." Shin Luo's face darkened. "Don't talk nonsense. You're the ones with mental problems." He looked at Shin Manting and said, "Don't listen to them." "Oh." Old Five grinned and said, "Isn't depression also a mental illness? It's the same to call it mental illness." Jin Yang agreed. His eyes observed the reaction of the mice in the glass box. That makes sense. Chapter 2102. It's just that I can't release myself in certain aspects. I'm too stressed and nervous, and I've created a sense of mental oppression on myself. Old Five smiled with a you-know-what-I-mean expression in his eyes. It's not very serious. At its worst, I've swallowed a few sleeping pills. Shin Luo said, "If you continue to talk nonsense, you can forget about this month's salary." "Oh." Jin Yang was not afraid at all. "I'm just explaining it to your wife. You and your wife haven't been together for so long, and you've been abstinent for 2 years. Think about it. How can a normal man endure it for so long?" "That's right," Lao Wu interrupted. "We're explaining it to you. If your wife misunderstands something, it'll be a big deal." "Uh-huh," Jin Yang echoed. Shin Manting couldn't help but interrupt when she saw the two of them echoing each other. "Didn't you say that sleeping pills will kill you?" "Uft." Jin Yang laughed. "Ahem." Lao Wu coughed lightly. "How should I put it? He just wants to sleep. He still has a son to raise, so he can't bear to die." "Oh." Shin Manting suddenly felt sad when she heard that. She reached out and hugged Shin Luo's arm. Shin Luo's face was already dark. He looked at the two of them and said, "Are you done?" "Don't. Sister-in-law is still here." Lao Wu nudged Jin Yang. Jin Yang immediately nodded. "Oh, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Jin Yang. I just joined the team 2 years ago. Have you had lunch? We haven't eaten yet. Come and help us." Lao Wu took off his gloves and mask, revealing his full beard. Shin Manting didn't expect such a face under his mask. She blinked. However, she vaguely felt that it was very familiar. Lao Wu noticed that Shin Manting was staring at him. He touched his beard and said, "You've grown again. You're sexier than 2 years ago, aren't you?" "Sexier?" Shin Manting wanted to laugh. When she was about to say something, Shin Luo pulled her aside. "Don't talk to them. They're not good people." Shin Luo went to the disinfection cabinet and took out a mask and gloves. "Sit here and don't touch anything. Many things are more dangerous." "Oh." Shin Manting was very obedient and sat aside. Jin Yang and Shin Luo exchanged some information and then swaggered away. Shin Manting sat at the small bar counter and rested her face on her hands. She watched Shin Luo work hard, and her eyes were filled with fascination. Ever since she woke up, he had been the one taking care of her. He was gentle, considerate, and understanding. Yet, she accepted all of his kindness as a matter of course. She didn't expect that he also had depression. Shin Manting didn't like the word depression very much. She didn't know where she came from, but she felt that people with this disease would die easily. Looking at him, she felt her heart ache. Shen Luo wore gloves and held the white mouse in his hand. No one knew what he was doing. But Shen, she thought. She couldn't help but smile sweetly. Suddenly, she wanted to call out to him. As soon as this thought came to her, she moved faster than she realized. Hubby. Of. Chapter 2103. After shouting these words, Shen Manting automatically covered her entire face. His eyes darted left and right like a thief. Shen Luo couldn't help laughing when he saw her cute little face. Then he looked around just like her and put his finger to his lips. Shen Manting immediately understood. She covered her mouth and blinked her eyes. Shen Luo whispered, "Most of the people here are single. If you do this, they will take revenge on me." Shen Manting was shocked. She immediately covered her mouth and didn't dare to say a word. How could the people here be so cruel? How could they take revenge? Her big eyes were full of anger. Shen Luo saw it and chuckled. But soon he lowered his head and continued to work. Shen Luo didn't let Shen Manting wait for long. After Lao Wu and Jin Yang came back from dinner, he immediately returned them. In the face of their protests, he arrogantly swaggered and said, "My wife is here. I have to accompany her. I will come back tomorrow." After that, he swaggered away with his wife under the envious eyes of all the people in the laboratory. Shen Manting felt that people behind her were looking at her. She timidly held Shen Luo's arm, but in her heart, there was a kind of excitement of doing bad things and bullying people. She laughed all the way. When she walked out of the door, she threw herself into Shen Luo's arms and shouted, "Honey!" "Ha!" Shen Luo gently stroked her cheek with his palm and looked at her tenderly. "What's wrong?" Shen Manting grabbed the clothes around his waist with both hands, stood on tiptoe and kissed his lips. She kissed him jerkily. Her movements were clumsy, but they easily stirred up his heart. Shen Luo immediately wrapped his arms around her waist, clasped her head with one hand, and gave her a deep and long kiss. Shen Manting's breathing was short, and her whole body was tense. But at the same time, she felt an unprecedented excitement. Oh. There was a teasing voice. Shen Luo immediately let go of Shen Manting and looked back. 3 or 5 people came out from inside. They looked at them with mischievous eyes and said, "Hello, boss madam. We are just passing by. You can continue." Continue? Shen Manting's face was already red with embarrassment. She grabbed his clothes and buried her face in his arms. He waited until the footsteps of his fellows were far away, before he dared to raise his head. She looked at Shen Luo and asked, "Are we going home now?" "Do you want to go home?" asked Shen Luo. Shen Manting wanted to go home to watch a movie and see her son. But when she saw the deep passion in his eyes, she couldn't bring herself to say it. His face burned even hotter as he said, "Then don't go home for now." "What are we going to do then?" Shen Luo looked at her. "How about we get a room?" Get a room? All of a sudden, Shen Manting felt her body heat up. The result of last night's indulgence was that her lower body was still a little sore. Upon hearing this, she immediately pushed him away and rebuked, "I'm going to ignore you." Shen Manting strode forward with heavy footsteps. Shen Luo couldn't help but laugh. He pulled her back and said, "I'm just kidding. Let's go watch a movie." "Watch a movie? Shall we go to the cinema?" "Yes." "Great." Shen Manting was a little excited. "I've never been to a movie theater before. Let's go, I'll take you there." Chapter 2104. Shen Luo looked at her with a smile and nodded. "Okay." When Shen Manting arrived at the cinema, she chose a movie with a name that seemed to suit her taste. It was called Iron Fist of Shame. Shen Luo didn't object. He bought popcorn and Coke, and Shen Manting asked for ice cream. The movie started, and the audience burst into laughter. However, Shen Manting occasionally asked, "Honey, what does the little egg mean?" Shen Luo said, "Well, it means that the man is childish." "Oh, honey, she stewed herself in an iron pot, and the water didn't boil. She's so careless." Shin Luo, and laughed and hugged her to continue watching the movie. They laughed the whole time, and Shin Manting was very excited when the movie was about to end. It's back, It's so handsome. Shin Manting shouted excitedly. Shin Luo, and began to doubt his own aesthetics. Is this handsome? But when the leading actor and actress kissed, Shin Manting turned her head and leaned over. Honey. Shin Luo, and turned his face and was attacked by her small mouth, which was stained with the taste of ice cream and popcorn. Shin Manting was elated. She hugged the popcorn and moved to the side, sticking her tongue out at him. Shin Luo couldn't help laughing and warned in a low voice, I'll teach you a lesson when we get back. Shin Manting pretended not to hear, and her eyes returned to the big screen. The movie ended, and Shin Manting was very excited. Honey, where are we going next? Where do you want to go? I want to go to the aquarium. Shin Manting's purpose was very clear. Shin Luo smiled and said, okay. The aquarium in the capital was very big, but the only thing that could make Shin Manting stop and watch were the corals swimming up and down like umbrellas. The colorful lights shone on the transparent bodies, which looked particularly gorgeous. Shin Manting's face was almost stuck to the glass, and she exclaimed, it's so beautiful. It's dirty. Shin Luo put his hand in front of her face. Do you want to raise a nest at home? Shin Manting's eyes lit up, and she looked up at him. Can I? Yes, Shin Luo smiled. As long as you like it. Yes. Shin Manting was very excited. I like it so much. All right. Shin Luo looked at her. I'll get someone to do it. Ah. Shin Manting immediately hugged him. Hubby, you're the best. As she spoke, she glanced left and right, then quickly tiptoed and kissed him on the lips. Shin Luo's heart was tickled. He was about to grab her, but she acted like she was playing a prank and immediately let go of him. She jumped to one side and looked at him with a grin. Shin Luo's smile widened and he said, naughty. Come here. No. Shin Manting clasped her hands behind her back and leaped forward. Gay and innocent as a child. A real child. There was a smile on his face, but he felt a little depressed in his heart. Shin Luo followed and shouted, slow down, don't fall. I won't. For a date, of course it had to be a romantic candlelight dinner. Shin Luo took her to the famous revolving restaurant. He sat at the window seat, overlooking the entire capital. Shin Manting looked down, and her face was full of amazement. She said, hubby, it's so beautiful. Do you like it? Yes. If you like it, we'll come often. Shin Luo looked at her with a smile. Next time bring our son. Chapter 2105. When Shin Manting heard this, she quickly looked around and whispered, is it expensive here? Well, it's not very expensive, Shin Luo said. Shin Manting looked down and nodded. Well, if it's not very expensive, let's come here more often. I love it here. It's so beautiful. Okay. Shin Luo agreed and took a sip of red wine. His eyes were full of tenderness. After dinner, Shin Manting was still in high spirits. She hugged Shin Luo's arm and said, honey, do you have anything else to do besides work and play with the baby? What did Shin Luo do when there was no one to date or play with? Shin Manting was very curious. He had a lot of time these days. Most of it was to accompany her. If she hadn't known that he was so busy with work today, she would have thought that he had so much time every day. Shin Luo looked at her and said with a smile, when you're not awake, I take the baby to see you and sleep. That's all I do every day. In the past 2 years, he had fallen into self-reproach and depression for nearly a year. During that time, he had thought of committing suicide several times to atone for his sins. However, little Moon was still young. Finally, under Shin Jilye's guidance and treatment, he slowly improved. However, he was still immersed in work. Work, hospital, home. Every day, he repeated the same days. He was like a soulless puppet, a walking corpse. Fortunately, she woke up. He had fantasized countless times. If she woke up, what kind of hatred would he face from her? How would she blame him? But there was nothing. She had forgotten everything. It was as if all his sins had never happened. Very good, however. Now facing the 12-year-old Shin Manting, Shin Luo, and felt more and more uneasy. It was unknown whether she would wake up and when she would wake up. If she woke up one day, what kind of situation would he face? He didn't dare to think about it. Looking at Shen Manting's incredulous eyes, which seemed to have expected it, his heart softened slightly. He reached out and held her in his arms. He whispered, "I only feel alive when you wake up." Shen Manting was caught off guard by his sudden confession, and her heart ached slightly. She hugged him tightly and didn't make a sound. Shin Luo closed his eyes and whispered, "Promise me one thing." "Oh," Shen Manting replied in a low voice. "Honey, I'll agree to anything you say." Shin Luo's heart softened, but at the same time, he felt a dull pain. "Manting, promise me that no matter what happens you won't leave me, okay?" Shin Manting felt a little baffled, but when she heard his words, she nodded and said, "I promise you, hubby. I won't leave you." "Then remember it." "I'll remember." "Swear it." "I swear." Shin Luo, and held her in his arms. He was well aware of the current situation. Everything was too easy. Nothing was going to turn out the way he imagined. Once she sobered up, she would still hate him. Shin Luo felt a little scared. All the happiness she had today was about to become a bunch of bubbles. When she woke up, it would all disappear without a trace. "Manting, I truly love you." Chapter 2106. Me too. I love it so much. Her innocent words echoed in Shin Luo's heart. It was already very late when they got home. Little Moon was still sleeping in his grandparents' room that night. The two of them tiptoed into the room. Shin Manting was so tired that she lay on the bed. Shin Luo smiled when he saw her like that. "You're lying down so soon. You haven't showered yet." No. Shin Manting covered herself with the quilt. "I'm exhausted. I just want to sleep." "You're sleeping so early." Shin Luo went up and pressed her down. "I want to discuss something with you." "Discuss?" Shin Manting looked up at him. "What is it?" "You don't have to discuss it with me." "Well, this is between the two of us. I can only make a decision after you agree." "What?" Shin Manting couldn't help but ask curiously. "Haven't you always been the one to do whatever you want? I've never had any objections." Shin Luo was a little restless when he heard her obedient words. He pressed down on her and gently hugged her. He whispered, "Then let's have a wedding and invite all our relatives and friends to the banquet." "Okay." Shin Manting didn't hesitate. "After the wedding, we'll go on a honeymoon." "Okay. Then." Shin Luo paused and seemed to be hesitating. He gently leaned over and whispered in her ear, "Let's have another child." Shin Manting couldn't help but shrink back when she felt his warm breath on her ear. She subconsciously said, "Okay." "Huh." Shin Manting seemed to have realized something. She turned to look at him and said bitterly, "Don't. I heard that giving birth is very painful." Shin Luo looked at her and smiled. He gently sucked her plump earlobes. Shin Manting was caught off guard. She felt unbearably itchy. She shrank back and said, "Go away." Shin Luo didn't listen to her. He hugged her tightly and slowly moved his lips downwards. They turned into dense kisses on her neck. Yi Qianqian had a dream. In her dream, a cute and adorable child crawled towards her with his bare buttocks. The child's features were exactly the same as Shin Jilia's. "Mom." His childish voice sounded childish as he reached out to grab her. Yi Qianqian reached out to him in an attempt to hug him, but the little figure, who was as delicate as jade, was like a bubble. The moment she touched him, he disappeared without a trace. Darkness, it was still darkness. Shin Jilia was by her bedside. He was leaning against the wall and taking a nap. But not long after he fell asleep, he was woken up by a soft sob. With a start, Shin Jilia woke up from his dreams. His gaze fell on Yi Qianqian, who was lying on the bed. No. Yi Qianqian's hands were stretched out, as if she was dreaming of something extremely sad. Her hands were flailing, and tears were streaming down her face. Shin Jilia's heart ached. He held her hand with both hands and said softly, "Wife Qianqian." "Baby." Yi Qianqian's voice was choked with sobs. She felt as if her heart was being choked with sadness. Shinjilia's heart ached even more, and a silent sourness rose from the bottom of his heart to his eyes. He leaned over and gently hugged her. I'm here. Don't cry, my wife. Yi Qianqian subconsciously hugged him. The next moment, she opened her eyes. She was surrounded by darkness. In front of her was an aura that was so familiar to her bones. Chapter 2107. It was a dream. What a realistic dream. She seemed to really feel that the baby was leaving her. Yi Qianqian gently hugged him and wanted to speak, but she found that her throat was choking. She couldn't say a word. Shinjilia gently raised his eyes and kissed away her tears gently and delicately. Yi Qianqian broke down and cried bitterly. Be good. Shinjilia felt as if his heart was being dismembered. It's okay. He'll come back sooner or later. Old Shun. Yi Qianqian hugged him tightly. She was devastated. I'm sorry. What are you talking about? Shinjilia looked a little angry. It's not your fault. It's me. If I had stayed by your side, nothing would have happened. You can hit me. Qianqian, don't cry. Shinjilia couldn't hold it in anymore. His voice was choked with sobs. I beg you, don't cry. This is the most important period for a woman. If you hurt your eyes from crying, how am I going to live in the future? A woman had to go through confinement after a miscarriage. During this period, it was the easiest for her to get sick. Just think of it as doing it for me, okay? Shinjilia hugged her and pleaded. You have to be strong for the sake of our next child. What if you get cataracts and glaucoma from crying and pass it on to the child? Yi Qianqian was crying properly. When she suddenly heard his words, she burst out laughing. He shoved him away, not knowing whether to laugh or cry as he shouted, Get lost! Shinjilia laughed and continued, That's right. Taking care of your body is more important than anything else. Yi Qianqian couldn't cry anymore after hearing his words. She wiped her eyes and sobbed as she looked at him. Shinjilia also restrained his emotions and asked, Are you hungry? Yes. Then I'll go buy some supper. Wait for me for a while. Don't go. Yi Qianqian looked at him and couldn't help crying again. Did you tell my sister? Shinjilia nodded. She came to see you in the afternoon, and sat here for more than an hour. She left when she saw that you didn't wake up. What time is it now? Well, Shinjilia glanced at his watch. 9:30 p.m. Then you ask you to come over and buy some supper on the way. Yi Qianqian wiped her eyes and sniffed. Ask her if Jianlin is asleep. If he isn't, bring him over. When Shinjilia heard that, he said, Jianlin is still young. A 2-year-old child should be asleep at this time. Let her bring him over tomorrow. I'll make a call first. Yes. Shinjilia dialed Yi Yu's number right in front of Yi Qianqian. However, it took a while before the call was picked up. The person who answered the phone wasn't Yi Yu. It was Li Jinnan. Brother-in-law. Li Jinnan called out in a flat voice. Is sister-in-law awake? Yeah, Shinjilia replied. If you and Yu have time, come over. Qianqian wants to see your son. All right, wait for us. We'll go now. Li Jinnan had always been straightforward with his words. Sister-in-law just woke up? Yes. Then I'll bring some food along. It's better to cook some porridge at this time. Is porridge okay? Sure. Okay, I'm hanging up. Shinjilia was speechless. Was it Jinnan? Yi Qianqian could tell from the expression on Shinjilia's face. Chapter 2108. That's a good man. Yi Qianqian felt a little relieved. He's better than your brother. Look at what happened to Yu when she married your brother. Now that Sister Manting is married to my brother, isn't that good? It's not good. Look at Manting now. I always feel like he's molesting a child. Shinjilia looked at her and tried to defend Shinluoan. Like a fish drinking water, you know when it's hot or cold. Yi Qianqian glanced at him and changed the topic. Help me up. I need to go to the bathroom. Shinjilia smiled helplessly. Yes, madam. By the time Li Jinnan and Yi Yuyu arrived, it was already an hour later. In his hand was a big clay pot, hanging from a steel hook. The two of them walked in holding the 2-year-old Li Jianlin. The little guy had been fed until he was chubby. When he walked in, he looked around with his dark eyes. When he saw Shunjilia, he looked up calmly. Shunjilia raised his eyebrows slightly and said, "How long has it been? You've grown quite a bit." Li Jianlin looked at him without blinking. "Call me uncle." Li Jinnan put the clay pot on the table and nudged the child. Li Jianlin appeared overly calm and obediently called out, "Uncle." His voice was neither loud nor soft, and he sounded serious. Shunjilia was speechless. He turned to look at Yi Qianqian and asked, "Is Little Moon the only child of his age who develops slowly?" Yi Qianqian replied, "Perhaps it's because Little Moon doesn't have a mother to teach him." That was the only explanation. Yi Yuyu walked over to Yi Qianqian and looked at her pale face. She felt a little heartache and said, "I waited here for you in the afternoon, but I didn't wake up, so I left first." Yi Qianqian looked at Yi Yuyu's increasingly rosy and rounder face and said enviously, "Your days are getting better and better. Jianlin is very sensible, isn't he?" It's hard to explain in a few words, just like his father. Yi Yuyu sighed softly. "You must be hungry. I'll wipe your body after dinner. By the way, Dad really wants to know what happened to you. He called me and said that my brother-in-law was fooling him. I don't know what to say. Give Dad a call later." Yi Yuyu said as she looked at Shunjilia. "Explain it to Dad." "Okay, tomorrow." Shunjilia scooped porridge for everyone and handed a bowl to Jianlin. Jianlin reached out and took it. "Thank you, uncle." But very quickly, she carried the bowl to the bedside and said, "Mom." She glanced at Yi Qianqian, who was standing behind Yi Yuyu, and gestured to her. She opened her mouth as if she didn't know what to say, but the look on her face had conveyed everything. Yi Yuyu took it and whispered, "Is this for Auntie?" "Yeah." Jianlin nodded. "For little Auntie." Yi Yuyu took it and smiled. "All right. Thank you, Jianlin." "Thank you, Jianlin." Yi Qianqian looked at him. Her eyes were full of envy, and her heart ached. She quickly averted her eyes and looked at Shunjilia. "Old Shun, feed me." "Let me do it." Yi Yuyu moved a stool over and sat down. "Brother-in-law has been staying here all day. He must be hungry." "I'm fine." Shunjilia walked over. "I ate something tonight. I'm still full." He took the bowl from Yi Yuyu's hand. "Humph. What did you call me?" "Hubby." "Ah. Ah." Chapter 2109. Although Yi Qianqian's body wasn't feeling well, she was still in good spirits after sleeping for so long. After finishing 2 bowls in one go, he was in high spirits and started chatting with Yi Yuyu. Li Jianlin was still young, so he was already sleepy. Li Jinnan held his son in his arms. The little guy fell asleep, and Shunjilia chatted with Li Jinnan from time to time. They chatted until 11:30 p.m., before Yi Qianqian remembered to ask them to go back. She was reluctant to leave, but she still asked Yi Yuyu to take the child back to sleep. Yi Qianqian looked at the child in Li Jinnan's arms and couldn't help but take a second look. How blissful. A family of 3. Yi Qianqian sighed. Yuyu's life is getting better and better. What are you envious of? We can do it too. Shunjilia tidied up the food. Do you want some more? There's still some left. Yeah. Feed me. By the time Yi Qianqian was discharged from the hospital, it was already a week later. When she returned to the capital, the whole family gathered around her and asked, "Are you all right? How did you end up in the hospital for so long after a fall?" "That's right." Grandma was so worried. Old Mrs. Shen looked her up and down. "Oh my, your little face has lost a lot of weight." "Oh my." Shen Longyue said, "Since you're back, stay at home for a while. Get Nanny He to make you some nourishing soup. You don't look too well." "Yeah." Mrs. Shen held Yi Qianqian's hand. "You have to nourish yourself during this period. Your grandmother did a divination for you and Julia yesterday. She said that you might get pregnant this year." When Yi Qianqian heard that, her heart ached. Yes, it was indeed possible to get pregnant this year. Moreover, she was already pregnant. But she had lost it because of her own carelessness. At that thought, Yi Qianqian felt an inexplicable heat that stung her eyes. When Shen Julia heard that, he hurried forward and said, all right. Qianqian just came back, and she's not feeling well. Why are you all crowding around her and asking her questions? Come. Dear, come with me to my room to rest. As he spoke, Yi Qianqian was pulled away by Shen Julia. When the family saw this scene, they were all a little surprised. Old Mrs. Shen vaguely sensed that something was amiss and said, I have a feeling that Julia is lying to us. What do you mean by being hospitalized for a fall? His limbs are still fine. How could he be hospitalized for a week after a fall? Mrs. Shen had been suspicious for a long time, but she could not figure out why. Was it a fall, or an illness, or something else? No one gave them an answer. From beginning to end, Shen Julia and Yi Qianqian avoided talking about it. When Shen Luo and Shen Manting returned home with the baby, they were surprised to see the three elders of the family sitting in the living room. Little Moon, who was being carried by Shen Luo and struggled to get up when he saw the scene. Then she ran over and hugged Mrs. Shen's knees, shouting, Grandma! Madame Shen stroked his furry little head and said, Good boy. Then she hugged Shen Longyue's thigh. Grandpa! Shen Longyue picked him up and said, In the future, you have to call me great-grandmother first when you enter the house. Do you understand? Oh. Shen Yueshao nodded and looked at old Mrs. Shen. He smiled and said, Great-grandma. Chapter 21:10. Shen Yueshao climbed down from Shen Longyue's knee and ran toward old Mrs. Shen. The merry-go-round, he exclaimed. Shen Manting saw her son's excited expression. She went up to him and said, We went to the amusement park and took him on the merry-go-round. Little Moon must be happy, right? Little Moon's pale face was flushed. He nodded and said, Yes, I'm happy. He pinched the baby's face and said, Dad, Mom, Grandma, I'll go in first. Go ahead. Old Mrs. Shen said with a smile. Oh, look at your little face. You're such a good grandson. Come, look at the toys your uncle brought back for you. Old Mrs. Shen carried the little boy into the toy room and opened the box of toys Shen Julia had brought back. Come, do you know how to play with building blocks? Yes. Shen Yuexiao's eyes lit up as he looked at the colorful building blocks in front of him. Shen Luoan walked in and said, Grandma, I'll play with Little Moon. You should go and rest first. Why should I rest? I'm just playing a game with my great-grandson. Why are you interfering? Go away. Don't stay here and join in the fun. Shen Luo, and was chased away mercilessly. He chuckled and said helplessly, All right then. Call me later if you need anything. Go away. Old Mrs. Shen ignored Shen Luo, and then continued to dismantle the building blocks for her grandson. Do you like this? Yes. Shen Luo, and watched for a while and returned to the room. Shen Manting sat on the bed and held the little things she had bought that day in her hand. When she saw Shen Luoan come in, she smiled and said, Honey, I want to keep this thing as a souvenir. She stood up as she spoke. She walked to the drawer and pulled it out, revealing a dazzling array of little things inside. They were all little things they had bought when they went out to play. There were small necklaces, key rings, and those little dolls and toys. She carefully put down the tassel pendant in her hand and said, When we're old, we'll be very happy to see all the places we used to go together. Shen Luoan's heart softened when he heard this. He gently hugged her waist from behind and whispered, Where did you learn this? Shen Manting blushed slightly and asked, What do you think? Don't you like it? I like it. Shen Luoan kissed her ear. I like it so much. It's so romantic. It was so romantic that Shen Luoan couldn't even be sure that Shen Manting had prepared this for their happiness. Shen Manting looked at the colorful little things in front of her and smiled contentedly. She said, Then I'll make more in the future. Every time I see these things, I feel so happy. Yes, I'm so happy. Shen Luoan smiled, but his heart was sad. It was precisely because he was too happy that he felt as if he had stolen all of this. Shen Luoan was combing Shen Manting's hair in the room. They talked and did some boring things in the house. Even the two of them didn't know what they were doing. Time passed quickly. Knock, knock. Someone knocked on the door. It was a little anxious and a little excited. Brother, come out quickly and see what your son has done. When Shen Luoan heard this, he stood up and opened the door. Chapter 21:11. Shen Luoan leaned over to take a look. It was just a simple 9-grid puzzle. It was very simple. But for a 2-year-old child, it was not easy at all. Shen Luoan glanced at it and asked, Little Moon did it himself? Yes. Shen Jilie was a little excited. He looked at him and said, I just bought it. I just took out a 9-grid puzzle for him. Now the little boy is playing with a 16-grid puzzle. Let's go and have a look. Shen Luoan was a little excited when he heard that. He followed Shen Jilie to Little Moon's toy room and saw the little boy lying on the ground playing with a puzzle. When he saw Shen Jilie and Shen Luoan walk in, he looked up at them and laughed. Daddy, uncle, what are you playing? Shen Luoan walked over and squatted down beside him to look at him. Little Moon looked at him and pointed at the puzzle. Uncle, he said obediently. Did I give it to you? Shen Luoan patted his head. Do you like it? Yes, I like it. Little Moon smiled. Shen Luoan looked over and found that Little Moon had almost completed the puzzle. The 4 corners were rounded, and the 4 corners had been put together. Are you done? Shen Luoan asked. Shen Yuexiao looked at the puzzle in front of him and reached out with the puzzle in his hand. He shook his head and said, No. Then he put the puzzle in his hand under the puzzle on the ground. Shen Jilie and Shen Luoan looked at it quietly and soon found that the edges had also been filled in. They found that it was completely accurate and there were no mistakes. He placed the last one down. It was a picture of Grey Wolf. It was very complete and there were no mistakes. Shen Luoan looked as if he had expected it, but Shen Jilie laughed and said, Brother, look at this. Shen Jilie pointed to a corner of the room. It was a small house made of Lego. It was very tall and beautiful. I just bought all these today. Look at how well he did. When Shen Jilie said this, he looked a little proud and said, I told you that my little nephew can't be more stupid than others. Who said that Little Moon is stupid? Shen Luoan raised his eyebrows. He's always been very smart. He remembers a lot of things once I tell him. You don't play with him often, and you don't even care about your nephew. How dare you say such things? Shen Jilie felt a little awkward. He coughed lightly and said, I just realized that the children of other families are quite smart. Look at Ming's daughter. She's only 1 year younger than Little Moon, but she already knows how to go to the bathroom by herself. She's also very articulate and quick-witted. Girls speak faster and their brains develop faster, but that's all. Little Moon's IQ is much higher than his peers, Gu Nianxin said. Yeah. My sister-in-law's son is pretty smart too. He's Li Jinnan's son. You speak very smoothly and your pronunciation is very accurate. Can he spin the Rubik's Cube? How would I know? Little Moon already knows how to do that. He can even assemble his own toys. Shen Luoan seemed to be showing off. This child takes after me. He doesn't like to talk, but his brain works faster than yours. Shen Jilie asked, Is there a personal attack? Chapter 21:12. Yes. Shen Jilie was speechless. He looked at him and asked, How are things between you and Sister Manting recently? Call me sister-in-law. Shen Luoan looked at him and stood up. He said softly, Come out with me for a while. Shen Jilie noticed that Shen Luoan's expression seemed to be more serious than before. Shen Luoan quickly walked out of the door and into the courtyard. Jilie. Yes. She seems to be growing up slowly. When she first woke up, she was 12 years old. Now she's grown up, but now she's becoming more and more independent. Shen Luoan reached into his pocket and took out a pack of cigarettes. He took one out and put it in his mouth, but he didn't light it. He looked at him and said, Moreover, she's been having more and more nightmares recently. What kind of nightmares? She's dreaming of the past. Shen Luoan looked at Shen Jilie with a sad gaze. She's dreaming of all kinds of things in the past. Last night, she seemed to have dreamed of the time you took her out to play. She was calling your name. Do you know what she said? What? Julia asked. When I took her out to play. Yes. She said, Julia, don't burn it. You can't eat it later. It's all yours. Shenluo, An's voice was a little low. He looked at Julia and pursed his lips. It happened that year. Do you remember? 3 or 4 years ago, when Yu was still at home. Shenluo, and finally took out a lighter from his pocket. After lighting it, he said softly, It happened so long ago, and it was such a trivial matter. How could she still remember it? I've forgotten it. Julia was silent. He stared at Shenluo, and then found that there was a smile on his face. But in his eyes, there was a clear sense of loneliness and a touch of fear. It was hidden deep within and difficult to detect. Julia sighed softly and considered his words before saying, Brother. Yes. Sister Manting has selective amnesia, and she's slowly recovering now. According to what you've described, she usually looks normal, but she dreams every night. Sooner or later, her memory will slowly recover in the form of dreams, Julia said. She paused for a moment and looked at Shenluo, who was looking at her seriously. She said slowly, The reason why she still remembers that kind of thing is perhaps because it's a trivial matter to you. But to her, it's a very precious or very happy memory. That's why it appeared in her dreams. Julia's words were very light, but every word was like a blunt knife, forcefully stabbing into his heart. Shenluo averted his eyes and looked at the lush roses in the courtyard. It was not the flowering season yet, but the branches and leaves were already very lush. He took a long drag on his cigarette, but for some reason he felt a lump in his throat and choked on the cigarette. He couldn't help but start coughing violently. He choked hard and heavily, and his throat was in severe pain. Unknowingly, she choked on her tears. Perhaps it was because the smoke was too thick, and when it reached her eyes, it became even more uncontrollable. Julia fell silent and looked at her quietly. After coughing for a long time, Shenluo wiped his eyes. His voice was terrifyingly hoarse as he asked, Is there any way to keep Manting at this stage? Chapter 21:13. Perhaps it was a selfish idea, but perhaps it was the best idea Shenluo could come up with. As long as she couldn't remember, as long as she retained her memories, then everyone could live happily ever after, couldn't they? When Julia heard Shenluo's words, he turned to look at him and frowned. Brother, are you crazy? This is very unfair to Sister Manting. When Shenluo heard this, he took another drag of his cigarette and exhaled. He turned to look at Julia's face. Julia frowned as if he couldn't understand him. He continued, Manting's mental state is that of a 12-year-old. What you're doing is no different from child molestation or child abduction. Shenluo suddenly laughed. He looked at Julia and said, Manting is the mother of my child. I just want her to continue living happily. As he spoke, he looked at the lush foliage in front of him and said softly, Moreover, how do you know if Manting is willing to regain her memories? Perhaps she prefers her current life, just like me. They spent every day carefree together. They laughed when they were happy and acted coquettishly when they were unhappy. They lived like a real married couple. Their recent life was the blissful life that he had always dreamed of. He believed that Manting felt the same way. Julia didn't say anything. He looked at Shenluo, and sighed deeply as if he had thought of something. Shenluo looked at Julia and walked up to him. He gently patted him on the shoulder and said softly, Forget it. Don't force yourself. When Shenluo finished speaking, he walked up the steps and turned to go back. Brother, Julia stopped him and said calmly, Why don't we think of a way to help Sister Manting regain her memories as soon as possible? Shenluo paused for a moment and suddenly laughed. He looked at him coldly and said, Julia, you're the crazy one. His tone was a little unfriendly. He looked at Julia in front of him, and his gaze was no longer the same as before. Julia clearly sensed his displeasure and didn't say another word. Shenluo quickly retracted his gaze and turned to go back in. Xin Yuexiao was alone in the room, holding a Rubik's Cube in his hand. When she saw Shen Luo enter the door, she immediately got up from the ground and went forward, shouting, "Daddy!" Shen Luo's thigh was being hugged by Xiao Yu'er. When he saw Xiao Yu'er's little face, his originally cold and displeased expression softened a little. He squatted down, picked up the baby, and walked into the room. Shen Manting was just about to take a shower when she saw Shen Luo and come in with their son in his arms. She leaned forward and kissed the baby. "You haven't taken a shower yet, have you?" "Not yet," Shen Luo said in a low voice. Shen Manting could smell the tobacco in his mouth. Feeling a little uncomfortable, she frowned and said, "Hubby, you smoked." "Yeah." Shen Luo looked at her and asked, "You don't like it?" I think it stinks." "The baby won't like it, right?" Shen Manting looked at the infant and smiled. "Hubby, let's give the infant a bath first. It's so late now. Let's let the infant sleep after bathing." Chapter 21:14. Of course I'm happy. Shen Manting reached out and took the infant into her arms without hesitation. Shen Manting spoke without hesitation. Shen Luo was silent for a moment. Shen Manting didn't seem to notice Shen Luo's strange behavior and asked, "What's wrong?" Shen Luo looked at her and moved his lips, but he quickly held back his words. Shen Manting felt a little strange and asked, "Honey, what's wrong with you today?" Shen Luo looked at her and thought for a while before he asked with difficulty, "Do you want to regain your previous memories?" Shen Luo's voice was a little low. He seemed to have thought about it for a long time. Shen Manting felt a little strange and subconsciously looked up at Shen Luo's expression. At that moment, Shen Luo seemed to be expressionless, but vaguely, it seemed that there was an indescribable message in his eyes. Shen Manting couldn't fully grasp such a message. However, she could feel his hesitation. She thought about it and replied, "I think it's better for me to regain my memories. After all, we used to be husband and wife. I don't even know what my life was like before. If I regain my memories, will my life be a little more complete? What do you think, honey?" "Yes." Shen Luo silently agreed. "I feel that I'm missing a lot of memories in my life. From 12 years old to 31 years old. This change is too sudden." Shen Manting pouted. She held the infant in her arms and looked for clothes for him. She rummaged through the wardrobe and said, "It's been 19 years. A lot of things must have happened in these 19 years. If I don't know anything, I'll feel like I'm feeling now. I'll feel empty in my heart." Shen Manting busied herself in front of the wardrobe and didn't look back. Shen Luo looked at her back and listened to her words. He felt a little sad in his heart. What if all you remember are unhappy things? Shen Luo's voice was a little hoarse as he slowly walked forward. If the things that you're about to remember bring you only unhappiness and pain, would you still be willing to remember them? How could that be? Shen Manting smiled and said, "Those are also my memories. Even if they are painful and unhappy, these memories are still mine. If they are not, then they are incomplete. For example, I feel that I am still 12 years old, but you tell me that I am already 31 years old. Although I am very happy now, sometimes I still feel that I am very childish. I don't like this feeling." Just like now, although she was holding her own son in her arms, she knew that she had given birth to this child, but she still didn't have the awareness of being a mother. Apart from the fact that the child was calling her mother, she didn't think there was any difference. If she left now, there wouldn't be any mother's love that couldn't be severed like what the TV shows said. Moreover, from the age of 12 to the age of 31, there are 19 years. During these 19 years, there must be a lot of things happening. Some are unhappy, and some are happy. Why don't I recover my memory? Shen Manting had already found clothes. She held the child's clothes and turned around, only to find that Shen Luo was looking at her deeply. She couldn't tell what kind of expression was in his eyes. Chapter 21:15. Shin Manting felt that Shin Luo's behavior was a little strange. She said coquettishly, "Come and hug our son. My arms are sore." Shin Luo walked forward and gently hugged her and his son. His action was a little sudden, and Shin Manting could sense that he was a little sad. Shin Yueshao also reached out to hug Shin Luo, and then called out, "Daddy." Shin Luo nodded and closed his eyes. "Little Moon, do you love your mother?" "I love Mommy. I love Daddy," Shin Yueshao shouted. "Daddy, Mommy, Little Moon loves you." The latter part of her sentence was a little soft, as if she was afraid that she would say something wrong. She was a little timid and careful. Shin Luo smiled silently, but his eyes were filled with bitterness. "Then let Daddy and Mommy take you to take a bath." "Yes," Shin Yueshao answered loudly. Shin Luo carried the baby over to her. "Did you have fun today?" "I'm happy." Shin Yueshao had a smile on his face. He looked at Shin Luo and said, "The wooden horse is fun. Then I'll take you there often." And the night was deep. Shin Luo lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Shin Manting was sleeping beside him. She gently leaned over and hugged him. "Hubby, are you in a bad mood tonight?" she asked softly. Every night, Shin Luo would pester her, push her down, and then pin her under his body. What was going on today? Shin Manting could sense that he was feeling down, so she hugged him tighter. Shin Luo pressed her hand down, turned around, and kissed her lightly on the lips. "Do you like being with me?" "I like it." She leaned over and kissed him gently on the lips. "Don't you like me anymore, hubby?" "Why would I?" Shin Luo's voice was low and hoarse. "I like it very much. I've always liked it." "Yes," Shin Manting replied. Her face was a little hot. "Hubby, my waist is so sore. Can you massage it for me?" Without waiting for Shin Luo's reply, she reached out and pulled his hand to hers. He placed his palm flat on the back of his waist and said, "Rub." Shin Luo switched from being passive to being active. He pressed down on her with a moderate amount of force. Shin Manting felt very comfortable. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed his lips. During this period of time, she had learned everything she should and shouldn't know. Under Shin Luo's guidance, she felt a little addicted to it. Her slender legs separated his legs and squeezed herself in. Then she gave him a long and deep kiss. Shin Luo remained passive, which made Shin Manting feel a little frustrated. She quickly broke away from him and said, "Hubby, aren't you coming today?" "Do you like it?" Shin Luo suddenly asked. "Do you really like this kind of thing?" Shin Manting's face was flushed from the kiss. She looked at him, and her eyes were particularly bright in the night. Shin Luo's throat tightened. In an instant, he pressed her down and gave her a deep, lingering kiss. His hand moved from the back of her waist all the way down, without much foreplay. It could even be said to be a little rushed. Shin Luo tore off the cloth beneath her and entered her. Shin Manting groaned. She felt a little uncomfortable and said, "Hubby." Shin Luo's lips fell densely on her upper body, igniting clusters of flames. Chapter 21:16. Shin Luo asked again, "Do you like it?" Shin Manting felt that Shin Luo was a little strange today. It was not only because of what he said at night, but also because of his abnormal behavior tonight. Even if he did not always take the initiative to ask for it, he would never be in a completely passive state like today. Shin Manting panted slightly, and did not speak when she heard this. Shin Luo suddenly became heavy, and Shin Manting could not help but let out a moan. "Manting." Shin Luo leaned over to her ear and whispered, "Do you like it? Tell me, do you like it?" Shin Manting pinched his arm with both hands. "Honey, honey." Shin Luo's movements became heavier and faster. Shin Manting could not avoid his ferocious attacks at all. Finally, under his questioning, she finally gasped and said, "I like it." "What?" Shin Luo approached and said in a low voice, "I didn't hear you clearly." "I like it, so like it, slow down." Shin Luo could not help but kiss her lips. In the last moment of madness, he reached the clouds with her. After it was over, Shin Luo got up and reached for the bedside table to find a pack of cigarettes. Shin Manting was wrapped in the quilt. When she saw Shin Luo pick up the pack of cigarettes, she asked, "Honey, are you smoking again?" "If you don't like it, I won't smoke." Shin Luo took out a cigarette and put it in his mouth. Shin Manting looked at him with a pair of straight eyes and said softly, "I don't like it." Shin Luo looked at her sideways. He did not light the cigarette. He just took 2 puffs of the cigarette, and then took it away. "Is the smell very strong?" Shin Manting still looked at him and reached out to hold his hand. Shin Luo followed her hand and pinched the cigarette. He broke it and threw it away. The dean used to have a father, but he smoked too much and his lungs were black. The hospital couldn't cure him, so he died. Shin Manting looked at him and said, "I think the dean's father died a little unjustly. He was quite a good man, but he died because of smoking. You should also stop smoking." Shin Luo smiled and said, "I won't smoke to death." The dean's father said the same thing, but he still died in the end. Shin Manting looked at him. "Don't smoke anymore." As she spoke, she frowned and said, "Hubby, my waist is getting more and more sore. Help me massage it." "Again?" Shin Luo raised his eyebrows and put the pack of cigarettes away. Then he lay down and reached out to touch the back of her waist. "I don't want to come. I'm not feeling well today." Shin Manting was very honest. She frowned and then said, "Hubby, did I play too long today? The roller coaster was a little dangerous. Did I hurt my waist? Get up. Let me take a look." Shin Luo lifted the blanket and asked her to turn away. Suddenly, Shin Manting exclaimed, "Ah, hubby." Shin Manting jumped up from the bed and stared in disbelief at the bed she had just been lying on. "Hubby, there's blood." Shin Luo followed her gaze and saw a patch of dark red at first glance. Startled, she lifted the blanket. He discovered that it wasn't just a patch of red. There were also scattered patches of water stains mixed with red blood. It looked a little scary. "Hubby." Shin Manting covered her mouth with an obvious look of fear on her face. "What should I do? I'm bleeding. You poked me and I'm bleeding." Chapter 21:17. Shin Luo was stunned at first, but when he heard Shin Manting's words, he laughed out loud. Shin Manting's little face was full of fear. Looking at Shin Luo, who was laughing mercilessly in front of her, Shin Manting was annoyed. She pounced on him and shouted angrily, "Honey!" Shin Luo couldn't help it. He held her with both hands and leaned back. However, this kind of laughter was getting louder and louder, and Shin Manting felt a little despised. Her cheeks were red from laughing, and she pressed her whole body on Shin Luo, and said angrily, "Stop laughing. What are you laughing at?" Her eyes unconsciously turned red, and Shin Manting gritted her teeth angrily. She sat down heavily on his body and shouted, "Don't laugh anymore, don't laugh anymore." Her voice was anxious and annoyed, and there was a hint of anger. As she spoke, she clenched her hands into fists and hit him. Shin Luo caught her hands and wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes. Then he said, "You." When he was about to speak, his eyes saw the appearance of Shin Manting in front of him. He suddenly couldn't help laughing out loud. Shin Manting was about to cry. Seeing Shin Luo like this, she was extremely angry and pouted with red eyes. "Stop laughing." Okay. Shin Luo immediately became serious and held her. "I won't laugh anymore." Shin Manting looked at him and pouted. "What should I do? You poked me and made me bleed. Now I feel pain in my stomach and it's still bleeding. What should I do?" Shin Luo finally stopped laughing, but he suddenly couldn't help laughing again. But when he saw Shin Manting was about to cry, he immediately restrained the smile on his face and said, It's okay. It's okay." Then he helped her up and glanced at his waist and abdomen. The place where she had just sat was already a bloody red. Shin Manting saw this and felt even more helpless. She said, "My stomach hurts." "It's okay." Shin Luo saw her fear and said softly, "Come on, get up first. Let's go take a shower together." "Okay." Shin Manting got up and was then led into the bathroom by Shin Luo. Shin Luo took a quick shower. After casually washing up, he told Shin Manting that he was going to take a shower. When he returned, He was holding a bag of something dark blue in his hand. Shin Manting thought it looked familiar and asked, "What is this?" "Sanitary napkin." Shin Luo and handed her a towel. "Hurry up and wipe yourself clean. Put on your clothes. I'll teach you how to use it." "Oh." Shin Manting watched him unwrap the package and couldn't help but ask, "Is this the thing that Mom put in our cabinet a few days ago?" "That's right." Shin Luo sighed in his heart. Mother is more considerate. She even thought of this aspect. It's come in handy so quickly. What is this aspect? A woman's normal physiological detoxification occurs once a month, Shin Luo explained to her. Every woman has a few days like this. You'll be fine once you use this. Oh, Shin Manting was a little curious, but she quickly put on her clothes. Shin Luo unwrapped one and taught her how to use it. The operation was very simple, and Shin Manting quickly mastered it. Chapter 21:18. Shin Manting looked at his meaningful expression and said weakly, "Honey, I seem to be bleeding again. This thing doesn't seem to be able to stop the bleeding." Shin Luo couldn't help laughing. "This thing doesn't stop the bleeding. It just absorbs your blood after it flows out. Don't be afraid. You'll be fine in a few days." Shin Manting didn't quite understand. She looked at Shin Luo in front of her and said softly, "Is this what a normal woman should have? Why haven't I seen it before?" Although she didn't remember much, she had never heard of such a situation. Recently, Shin Luo has been a little strange. Could it be that he had planned to make her bleed for a long time? Or perhaps there was something on her husband's penis that would hurt her. That was why he was acting so strange tonight. Later, he couldn't help but have sex with her. The more Shin Manting thought about it, the more panicked she became. She looked at Shin Luo in front of her and said sadly, "Honey, you don't have to consider my feelings. Just tell me directly. Did you hurt me? Are you afraid that I'll hate you, so you lied?" Shin Luo laughed out loud and helplessly pressed her into his arms. He whispered, "No, what I said is true. Don't be afraid. There's nothing to be afraid of." Shin Manting looked at him and mumbled, "Why don't I believe you? It's true." Shin Luo pulled her out. "Come here. I'll explain it to you." When they walked out, the two of them immediately saw the dark red bloodstain on the bedsheet. Shin Luo looked at the mess and said helplessly, "Come on, give me a hand. Let's change the bedsheets first." Shin Manting was very obedient. She responded and whispered, "Okay." Shin Luo quickly took out the bedsheets and removed the dirty ones. He said, "This is called menstruation for women. If they don't have menstruation, they can't have children." "Oh, I see." Shin Manting nodded but soon asked, "Why didn't I have it before?" "Because you're still young." Shin Luo looked at her. "Most women have their first period between the ages of 13 and 15. That's usually the case. When you were 12, I'm afraid you hadn't even had your first period yet." "Oh, I see." Shin Manting nodded. "Did I experience it when I was sleeping in the hospital? Isn't it disgusting to dirty the bed every day? It won't happen. When you were in the hospital, you didn't have enough food and nutrition. It was difficult for your body to metabolize food, so you didn't have this kind of thing." Shin Luo put the dirty bedsheets into the basket. Shin Manting blinked and asked, "Honey, I'm on my period now. Will I have a baby?" Shin Manting sounded doubtful, and she looked a little puzzled. Shin Luo paused when he heard this question. Then he turned around and glanced at Shin Manting. When Shin Manting met his gaze, she looked at him and said, "I heard that giving birth is very painful. Honey, can I not have a child?" When Shin Luo heard this, an idea suddenly sprouted in his mind. In the past, no matter how much she hated herself, she couldn't let go of her child. Chapter 21:19. Does that mean she won't leave? Now, before Shin Manting remembered anything, he had already coaxed her to get the marriage certificate. She had been awake for more than half a month, and her body had almost recovered. Now she was on her period. When Shin Manting is pregnant, he won't let her go no matter what. As he thought about it, he looked at her with a pair of burning eyes. He quickly looked away, reached out to change the bedsheets and said, "Sure, but this problem is not something we can control. If you are pregnant, you can't abort it." When Shin Manting heard this, she subconsciously covered her stomach and said softly, "If I abort it, the child will die, right?" "Yes," Shin Luoan replied. He turned his face to look at her seriously and said slowly, "No matter what, it is a small life. If a living human life is erased, what is the difference between it and direct murder?" Looking at Shin Manting in front of him, Shin Luoan's expression was solemn. When Shin Manting saw Shin Luoan's expression, she was a little frightened and said timidly, "Is not wanting to have a child the same as killing?" "There is no such saying." Shin Luoan put the bedsheets down. "It's just that if such a small life is already by your side, not only do you not cherish it, but you would rather choose to abandon it, then isn't that killing? Isn't that right?" His logic was impeccable, and Shin Manting was speechless for a moment. She subconsciously stroked her stomach and did not say anything. Just like when you were a child, you were abandoned on the street by your biological parents. If no kind-hearted people sent you to the orphanage at that time, would you be dead now? Then did your biological parents also kill you? Did they also become murderers? "But they gave birth to me." Shin Manting couldn't help but refute. "We haven't given birth yet, have we?" "Why not? So you have to raise the child after you are born," Shin Luoan interrupted her. "If you are pregnant and don't want to give birth, what is the difference between you and them?" Shin Manting was speechless again. "So if you are pregnant, you must give birth." Shin Luoan looked at her with a serious expression. "Giving birth isn't as painful as you think. You've already given birth once. Don't be afraid." This time he would be by her side, accompanying her from start to finish, taking care of her. When Shin Manting saw the look of anticipation on Shin Luoan's face, her unwavering heart suddenly wavered. Facing his threatening gaze, she shrunk her neck and said softly, "Then if I'm pregnant, I'll give birth. If I'm not, I won't give birth." A smile finally appeared on Shin Luoan's face. He smiled and gently pulled her closer to him. He planted a kiss on her forehead and said softly, "Okay." When Shin Manting saw the happy expression on Shin Luoan's face, she felt as if she was a lamb in a tiger's den. He couldn't help but retort, "If I'm not pregnant, you can't use despicable means to make me pregnant." His little face puffed up, full of warning. Shin Luoan froze, but he didn't say anything. He hugged her and planted a kiss on her lips. Shin Manting vaguely guessed something and felt inexplicably unhappy. Chapter 21:20. She was throwing a tantrum. Shin Luoan looked at her back and didn't care. He turned around and continued to change the bedsheets. It was always a little difficult to be alone. Shin Manting was sitting by the side playing with the computer. When she saw that Shin Luoan had finished changing all the bedsheets, she slowly came over with the computer and lay down beside him. Shin Manting liked watching movies more and more, ever since Shin Luoan took her to watch Gone with the Wind. Today they were watching Inception starring Leonardo DiCaprio. Shin Luoan glanced at the computer. It was a little late. "Aren't you going to sleep?" Shin Manting pretended not to hear him and stared at the computer. Shin Luoan smiled and quickly lay down and closed his eyes. However, Shin Manting was watching a movie, so it was impossible for Shin Luoan to fall asleep. In his mind, he had already unknowingly conceived a plan for the future. After Shin Manting was pregnant, he would put aside the matter of the laboratory and leave everything to Lao Wu. He only needed to go back occasionally and spend the rest of the time with her. In the past 2 years, Shin Manting had been in a coma, which was enough for him to worry about. Next, he would have a good rest for a year. When Shin Manting gave birth to the child, he would go back to the laboratory. If Shin Manting didn't regain her memory, of course, everything would be fine. If she recovered her memories during this period of time, then she would probably hate him a little less on account of how diligent he was and how serious he was. Moreover, he took good care of Xiao Yuer. Would that be enough to offset Shin Manting's resentment towards him when she grew up? Shin Luoan closed his eyes and lay in bed. His mind was racing. Shin Manting didn't know how much time had passed before she finally covered the laptop and put it aside. Then she carefully lay down. After lying down, Shin Luoan reached out and hugged her. Shin Manting was obviously shocked, and her whole body trembled. But she quickly reacted and elbowed Shin Luoan. She said coquettishly, "You're so annoying. You're pretending to be asleep when you're not." "I'm not," Shin Luoan smiled. "You just thought I was asleep. When did I tell you that I was asleep?" Shin Manting was a little unhappy and said, "You're twisting words and forcing logic." Shin Luoan hugged her and whispered, "Let's sleep." The heating in the imperial capital had been turned off, and the weather was a little cold. At that moment, Shin Luoan's arms were indescribably warm. Shin Manting leaned over and hugged him tightly. She closed her eyes. She was angry just now, but in fact, she was already very sleepy and soon fell asleep. However, just like in the past, he still had a series of nightmares. She dreamt that she was standing in the middle of a bustling wedding. Luxury cars were coming and going, and the beautiful bride was holding the hand of the handsome groom. Surrounded by the crowd, they walked out step by step. She watched from afar, watching their backs disappear into the luxurious villa, and then slowly retreated. She didn't know why, even though she was just a bystander at this moment, she couldn't help but feel pain in her heart. It was as if this had happened to him before. He slowly retreated, and soon, he was out of everyone's sight. Chapter 21-21. Goodbye Shin Luoan. Her voice was filled with indescribable indifference and hatred that he had been familiar with for a long, long time. The low voice was particularly ear-piercing in the night. Shin Luoan was awakened from his sleep and turned his head to look at Shin Manting. Shin Manting was very quiet, as if what he had just heard was just an illusion. He gently hugged Shin Manting beside him, his heart beating heavily. But his heart was getting emptier. Shin Manting seemed to feel Shin Luoan's touch and embrace and consciously leaned into his arms. Shin Luoan held her in his arms and pinched the soft flesh on her waist that had grown in the past half a month. He couldn't help but call out softly, "Manting." His voice was very soft and slightly trembling. Shin Manting seemed to have heard Shin Luoan's voice and seemed to have dreamed of something happy. She snuggled into his arms and smiled with an indescribable emotion. Shin Luoan had been paying attention to her expression, but under such weak light, he couldn't see it clearly. But Shin Manting was indeed smiling. Shin Luoan couldn't help but call out softly again, "Manting." Shin Manting didn't respond this time, and just breathed evenly. But Shin Luoan couldn't fall asleep. He didn't know how long he had been awake, but Shin Manting suddenly moved. Shin Luoan clearly felt it and looked down. Soon, Shin Manting moved again and said dreamily, "Shin Luoan, Shin Luoan." Shin Luoan's body suddenly stiffened. Although her voice was soft, the indifference in it was still real, and Shin Luoan could hear it clearly. This soft call seemed to be just a temporary nightmare. Soon Shin Manting calmed down. He subconsciously hugged her tightly, and his heart was in a mess. After a long time, Shin Manting sobbed again. "No. I beg you." Shin Luoan was on the verge of breaking down. He hugged her tightly in his arms and couldn't hold himself back any longer. His breathing became heavy and he called out softly, "Manting, Manting, wake up. Don't continue. Wake up, wake up." His voice was choked with sobs, filled with panic and guilt. Shin Luoan admitted that he was selfish. He never wanted Shin Manting to regain her memory. From the moment he knew that she was no longer Shin Manting, he had already made up his mind to keep her by his side. Now she could dream more and more of the past, and she was getting closer and closer to regaining her memory. Absolutely not. Shin Luoan's excessive action woke Shin Manting up. When she opened her eyes, her face seemed to be a little wet, especially her eyes. Her vision was obscured by tears. Shin Manting looked at him blankly and called, "Luos." Shin Manting was a little confused. She looked at him and shouted, "Hubby." Manting was a Shin Luoan calmed down when he heard the familiar voice. Lowering his eyes, he looked into her clear eyes and couldn't help but hug her tightly. Lowering his head, he gently kissed her lips. His movement was so sudden that Shin Manting didn't have time to react, and was swept away by him in an instant. Shin Luo's movements were a little heavy and urgent. She wasn't sure if it was an illusion, but she actually felt that he was a little nervous. She placed her palm on his back and gently patted him like how he usually comforted her. Chapter 21-22. Feeling Shin Luo's emotions. Shin Manting suddenly remembered a very impressive sentence in a movie that she had watched recently. People who have no sense of security will feel nervous because they are afraid of losing. For some reason, this sentence automatically came to Shin Manting's mind. Shin Luo noticed Shin Manting's movements, and inexplicably felt more at ease, and his movements unconsciously became much gentler. The kiss didn't last long, and soon Shin Luo let go of Shin Manting. Shin Manting opened her eyes and looked at him, and asked softly, "Honey, did you have a nightmare?" Her soft voice was particularly seductive in this night. Her tone was completely different from the indifference and alienation she had when she was sleeping. This Shin Manting was even more pleasing to him. Shin Luo gently hugged her and whispered, "I dreamed that you were going to leave me, just like 2 or 3 years ago." When Shin Manting heard this, she immediately pushed him away and said, "Honey, how can you curse your own wife like this?" His own wife? Shin Luo couldn't help but smile, and the anxiety in his heart dissipated in an instant. "Didn't I have a car accident 2 or 3 years ago?" Shin Manting rebuked, "I won't. Don't curse me, or I'll be hit by a car again, and you'll lose your wife again." Shin Luo smiled, held her in his arms and whispered, "Yes, I won't." "But honey, I also had a nightmare." Shin Manting hooked his shoulder and pouted. "I dreamed that I gave birth to a child, and you weren't by my side. I was alone in the hospital, and I was so scared. Then I stayed in the hospital alone, and I didn't have food to eat. I was so hungry, and then I bought the same food as others, but I couldn't eat because I gave birth to a child." As she spoke, Shin Manting's voice gradually became softer, with a little sadness. "I feel so pitiful, so sad, and my heart hurts, as if it really happened." Shin Manting hugged Shin Luo tighter and her heart ached, and she whispered softly, "But these dreams are fake, right? These things didn't happen at all, and they're not real. Honey, you wouldn't treat me like that. You wouldn't even come to see me after I gave birth, would you?" Shin Luo's heart was empty for a moment, and it was terrible. Yes, it was very possible that all of these things had happened. At that time, Shin Manting gave birth, and he was 2 days late. When she gave birth, it was the time when she needed the child's father the most, but he wasn't there. The day after she gave birth was when a woman was at her weakest, and he wasn't there. It was only on the 3rd day that he finally arrived. He had let her down. Shin Luo was silent for a while before he said, "I told you it was a dream. It's impossible not to feel anything. But a dream is a dream." He caressed her long hair and said softly, "Don't take it seriously." Shin Manting hugged him and felt a little more at ease. She rubbed herself against his chest and said coquettishly, "Hubby, my stomach hurts. It's bloated and painful. Help me rub it." She reached out and pulled his palm to touch her lower abdomen. Shin Luo's warm palms caressed her lower abdomen, massaging it gently. Chapter 21-23. She didn't know how many times she had woken up from her sleep. Shin Manting looked at the ceiling blankly. She subconsciously reached out to touch her side, but it was already empty, with only a little residual warmth. She got up and was surrounded by a dazzling light. At the same time, the door of the bathroom was opened. Shin Manting looked over and saw Shin Luo dressed neatly coming out from inside. When he saw her, Shin Luo stepped forward. Shin Manting shrank back as if she was facing a formidable enemy. She seemed to be at a loss and exclaimed, "Shin Luo." Shin Luo stopped moving forward, and his back stiffened. Looking at Shin Manting in front of him in disbelief, Shin Luo suddenly panicked. But soon, Shin Manting's face became a little blank. Looking at Shin Luo, she frowned and said, "Honey." Shin Manting's voice was filled with confusion. She looked up at Shen Luoan, who was standing still, and put her palm on her chest. Shen Luo, and felt as if his heart was being squeezed. He looked at Shen Manting in front of him, and walked over step by step. Shen Manting looked at him, and her eyes trembled, but she resisted. She shrank back, lay down again, and covered herself with the quilt. Shen Luoan stopped moving and stood still, pursing his lips. No one made a sound, and the room was very quiet. After a long time, Shen Luoan said, "Are you not feeling well?" Shen Manting didn't say anything and covered herself with the quilt with her back to him. Shen Luoan walked over and said, "Girls are more uncomfortable these days, but it will be over in a few days. Do you want to get up and change the cushion? It's not good for your health if you use it for a long time." Shen Manting's eyes were tightly shut, and she subconsciously clamped her legs together. Her butt was a little wet, and it felt like it was dirty again. Feeling a little embarrassed, Shen Manting whispered with her back to him, "Honey, help me find one. I'll change it myself." Shen Luoan's heart calmed down, and his originally tense mood and expression completely relaxed at this moment. He was in a good mood and replied, "Okay." Shen Luoan went to the cabinet and took out a tablet that Mrs. Shen had prepared some time ago and handed it to her. Shen Manting's head popped out from under the quilt, and her cheeks were red. He reached out his hand to pull it back, but quickly retracted it and said, "You can go. I'll get up by myself." It was very likely that his pants would be dirted. It was too embarrassing. Shen Manting shyly covered herself with the blanket, not daring to show her face. Suddenly, she heard Shen Luoan's chuckle. Then the sound of his footsteps gradually faded away. He didn't get up until he heard the door open and close. Shen Manting blushed. She pinched the thing in her hand and lifted the quilt. On the dark bedsheet, there was an even darker mark that was very eye-catching. As expected, Shen Manting held the piece of pink bread in her hand and slowly made her way to the bathroom. Only then did he realize that his pants were all dirty. Crestfallen, he returned to the cloakroom to search for clean clothes. When he opened the drawer, he saw the 2 red booklets that had been quietly placed there not long ago. The 3 golden words were especially eye-catching. She didn't know why, but when she saw those 3 words, she felt very uncomfortable. When he opened it, the photo of the 2 of them was especially eye-catching. His breathing became short, and his head felt as if it had been hit by a sharp object. Shen Manting's vision darkened, and her legs gave way. She fell to the ground. Chapter 21-24. The whole world was shaking, and everything familiar around her seemed to be far away. It was so familiar that it was no longer familiar. She fell limply, unable to muster up any strength. Shen Luoan closed the door behind him, but he didn't leave. He leaned against the door, panicking for no reason. A voice in his heart strongly reminded him that she was about to wake up. He had this feeling before, but it had never been as strong as it was now. His heart was beating strongly, quickly with panic and guilt. Shen Luoan hesitated for a moment, then opened the door again. However, he heard heavy breathing coming from the cloakroom. His heart skipped a beat, and he strode forward. Shen Manting was lying on the ground, her eyes half closed, and she looked over with difficulty. Her eyes were filled with all kinds of emotions. For Shen Luoan, each of them carried a heavy and fatal destructive force. Subconsciously holding his breath, Shen Luoan felt that something was quickly withdrawing from him. Shen Manting looked at him and seemed to twitch her lips. At the same time, a drop of water fell from the corner of her eye. The next moment, Shen Manting weakly lowered her head and closed her eyes. Manting! Shen Luoan felt terribly empty, and he picked her up. At this moment, Shen Manting's face was pale, and she leaned against him weakly. She had already lost consciousness. Shen Luoan looked at her, and his heart trembled. He panicked and lost. The smell of disinfectant was very unpleasant. Shen Manting opened her eyes, and there was a burst of pain in her lower abdomen. She stared at the white ceiling above her head, and after a long time, she looked away. She sat up, and it was quiet all around. The lights in the ward were not on, and the windows were open. The wind was a little strong, and the curtains were rolled up high, fluttering. At the same time, there was a faint smell of tobacco. Shin Manting looked sideways and saw a figure standing by the window, both elbows leaning on the windowsill, holding a cigarette between his fingers. It's him. Shin Manting smiled silently and raised her hand to touch the top of her left fifth rib. Here, his heart was beating faster and faster. This was the feeling of being alive. She was still alive. Still alive. Shin Luoan put out the cigarette, turned around, and looked at her. At this moment, Shin Manting's eyes were clear and her mind was clear. A pair of eyes looked at him indifferently and calmly. The corners of her pale lips curled up slightly. She seemed to be mocking him, but at the same time, it also seemed to be a greeting between old friends. She said, Shin Luoan. Shin Luo, and felt a lump in his throat, and an indescribable sense of suffocation welled up from the bottom of his heart. His body tensed up, and he slowly walked forward. Shin Manting looked at him. She was surprisingly calm. She watched helplessly as Shin Luo and walked up to her and smiled. His smile was filled with a gentleness she had never seen before. It was as if he was facing another person. Or perhaps he was facing another Shin Manting. You're awake? Shin Luo, and's voice was soft and gentle. He reached out and was about to touch her forehead. Shin Manting narrowed her eyes and raised her hand to slap him away. Shin Luoan paused for a moment, then calmly retracted his hand. The smile on his face didn't change. He walked to the bedside table and said, Mom just stewed some soup. It took a long time. Drink it quickly and you'll be discharged. Your son is waiting for Mom and Dad to come home. However, Shin Manting looked at him expressionlessly. Looking at the gentle smile on his face, she felt extremely sarcastic in her heart. The corner of Shin Manting's mouth twitched coldly, and she said slowly, Is it interesting? Chapter 21-25. The thermos rolled on the ground twice, but it was safe and sound. However, Shin Luoan remained motionless, as if he had been struck by lightning. With his back facing her, an indescribable bitterness welled up in him. It broke through his throat, broke through his shackles, and overflowed into his eyes. In the end it had come. What he feared and worried about still couldn't escape. Shin Manting looked at his back coldly and asked, How long was I lying there? Shin Luo, and suppressed his surging emotions and kept his back facing her. He bent down to pick up the thermos and wiped it with 2 tissues before saying, A day, about 12 hours. Shin Manting was stunned and sneered. Do you think I'm an idiot? If it's 12 hours, it should be dawn by now. Moreover, I was hit by a car. But there was no pain on her body. It was strange. She clearly felt that she was in so much pain that she was about to die. The sound of bones breaking seemed to still be ringing in her body. But now her limbs were fine, and she didn't feel any pain at all. Except for her stomach. There was a familiar pain in her lower abdomen. It must be her period. When the car accident happened, she had just finished her period, and it happened in the middle of the night. If it had been 12 hours, it should be past 10 o'clock in the morning. Without a doubt, Shin Luoan was lying to her. He had put in a lot of effort to escape the blame for the car accident. He had to make soup and smile. It was hard on him. Shin Manting only felt sarcastic, but she didn't realize that Shin Luo and was once again frozen in place. With his back facing her, Shin Luo and had a crazy thought. She seemed to have forgotten everything that had happened during this period of time, including marrying him and those days and nights of indulgence. Wait, I'll ask Julia to come. Shin Luo and put the thermos back on the bedside table and walked out without looking back. After closing the door, Shin Luo and called Shin Julia with trembling hands. The call was quickly connected, and Shin Julia's voice came through. Brother. Julia Manting is awake, but Shin Julia looked at Shin Manting in front of him and asked again, Do you remember the date of the car accident? I don't remember. How long do you think you slept? Not long. It feels like less than a day. Yeah. Shin Julia nodded. Do you still remember me? What do you think? She asked. Shin Julia chuckled and opened his arms to her. Sister Manting, welcome back. Shin Manting was a little dazed as he hugged her. But it was only for a moment before Shin Julia let go. Brother, come out for a moment. Shin Luoan already knew. Shin Manting couldn't remember returning to the time when she was 12 years old. She couldn't remember anything that had happened since she first woke up this morning. From the looks of it, it's selective amnesia, Shin Jilia said slowly. It's actually quite normal for such a situation to occur. Jilia. Shin Luoan's voice was a little hoarse. She still hates me just like before. Shin Jilia was silent. For a moment he didn't know what to say. He patted him on the shoulder and said, "Take it slow. You can't rush things." Shin Luo, and remained silent. Shin Jilia looked at him for a long time before whispering, "I think you should be glad that she can't remember." Chapter 21-26. Shin Luoan fell silent again. Shin Jilia felt sympathy for him. He patted him on the shoulder and said, "Sister Manting just said that she wants to be discharged." Yes. The entire journey back home was silent. Shin Manting went straight to her nanny's room. The nanny's room was very, very small. After 2 years of accumulation, it had become a storeroom. At this moment, it was filled with things. The things that he had used in the past, old and new, were all gone. Her phone was nowhere to be found. Shin Manting was silent for a long time before she sighed heavily. Before the accident, she had been sleeping in his room. It didn't seem to matter if he slept with her again. However, time seemed to pass for a very, very long time. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for them to pile up to this extent in just one day. How long had she slept? "Do you need this thing?" Shin Luoan asked, startling Shin Manting. Shin Luo, and turned around and saw a pack of sanitary napkins in his hand. Shin Manting glanced at it and grabbed it, saying, "Of course I need it." "All right. Come to my room and sleep." Shin Luoan turned around and said, "There are too many things here. It'll take some time to tidy them up." Shin Manting remained silent, and stood with her back to him. Shin Luoan sighed and said, "I'll sleep on the sofa. Come over." With that, Shin Luoan's footsteps faded away. Shin Manting turned her head and saw his back. The lights in the corridor cast a long shadow on his body. Shin Manting felt a little complicated. She held the bag in her hand, turned around, and walked into the room. He would not wrong himself. Shin Manting went to the cloakroom and found many well-fitting clothes. However, his style seemed to be much cuter than hers. They were all pink, red, green, and blue. They were all cute pink colors. He found a set of pink bunny pajamas and took a bath before falling asleep. Shin Luoan sat in the living room and smoked. Shin Luoan seemed to have expected all of this, so when it came, he didn't seem to feel anything other than heaviness. She was still the same. Just like 2 years ago. 2 years ago, she wouldn't have left. 2 years later, would she still not leave? So be it. That was pretty good too. As long as she was still around. That was what he was thinking, but the smoke drifted up and into his eyes, stinging his eyes. Chuckling softly, he extinguished the cigarette. However, it was so uncomfortable that it was almost suffocating. He lay down and covered himself with a thin blanket. He closed his eyes, but his consciousness was clear. After an unknown period of time, he suddenly heard a cry. The sound of a woman crying. Shin Luoan opened his eyes abruptly. Before he could react, he heard the sound of the door opening, and the crying suddenly became louder. He sat up and looked into the distance. It was Shin Manting. When Shin Manting saw him, she sniffed hard and rushed over to him, shouting, "Hubby!" Shin Luoan was stunned. Before he could react, he was hugged by her soft body. Shin Manting cried loudly and hugged his neck tightly. She sobbed and shouted, "Honey, I just had a nightmare. I was scared to death." Sob. Shin Luoan couldn't react at all. He subconsciously raised his hands to hug her, but he didn't dare to raise them. For a moment, they were frozen in midair. The commotion outside had also awakened the others. Shin Jilia came out of the room and turned on the lights. Shin Luoan subconsciously narrowed his eyes and looked over. Chapter 21-27. Shin Manting also looked over, and saw that it was Shinjilia. She wiped her eyes and wanted to stop. However, she still couldn't control herself and burst into tears. Jilia. Shinjilia looked at Shinmanting and then at Shinluoan. He saw that Shinluo and was also at a loss. Shinluo and turned around and patted her back gently. He said slowly, "Good girl, don't cry." Shinmanting's crying stopped a little. She sat in Shinluoan's arms and sobbed. "Hubby sob." Shinluoan looked at her in silence. He looked at her and found that at this moment, her eyes were clear and clouded with a layer of mist. She was looking at him with a wronged expression. She was like a child who got up in the middle of the night and couldn't find her parents. She was at a loss and helpless. Shinjilia saw it clearly and called out, "Sister-in-law." Shinmanting looked over and wiped her eyes while sobbing. Shinluoan gave her a tissue. His emotions were very complicated. Shinmanting took it and wiped her tears and blew her nose. She said pitifully, "Did I wake you up? Go to sleep. I just had a nightmare." "Okay," Shinjilia replied, but he didn't leave. Instead, he stepped forward and asked, "What did you dream about?" Shinjilia wasn't the only one who was curious about this question. Even Shinluo, and turned his head away. Shinmanting sobbed and said, "I dreamed that I chased my husband away." As she spoke, she trembled as she cried, and her tears once again poured down. "But my heart, it hurts so much. I don't want to drive my husband away, but I can't control myself. I feel so sad." His voice was intermittent, and he sounded like he was about to cry. Shinluoan was silent and gently patted her back. She looked up at Shinjilia and found that his face was solemn. "What's wrong?" Yi Qianqian's voice came over. Yi Qianqian walked over in her nightgown. When she saw Shinmanting sobbing, she touched Shinjilia and asked, "Did you quarrel?" "It's okay." Shinjilia squeezed Yi Qianqian's hand and looked at Shinluoan. He said meaningfully, "Brother, take sister-in-law in first." "Yes," Shinluoan replied. He got up and gently pulled her along. "Let's go in first." Shinmanting was sobbing obediently. As soon as she entered the room, she hugged his neck tightly and whispered, "Hubby, do you love me?" Shinluo, and was about to be pulled up. He pulled her into his embrace and sighed softly, "Love, of course I love you." "Then can you promise me one thing?" Shinmanting looked up at him with an aggrieved expression. "If I chase you away in the future, it will definitely be fake. I don't want to chase you away. If I'm not dreaming, I'll really chase you away. Don't go. I don't want you to go. Don't go." Shinluoan's heart softened. He couldn't help but lower his head and kiss her. His palm brushed through her hair and he whispered, "What if you're serious about chasing me away?" "That's impossible," Shinmanting said with a serious expression. "That's not me. Hubby, don't go. What if I take it seriously?" Shinluoan's voice was as light as a feather and ethereal. Shinmanting choked on her words and stared at him blankly. After a long time, she said, "Then when I wake up from my dream, I'll go after you." Yi Qianqian felt that something was wrong. Why was Shinmanting crying in the living room all of a sudden? She nudged Shinjilia and said, "Old Shin, Big Brother's temper is terrible. Did he get angry at Manting?" You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.